In 2009, From Software released Demon Souls, a Middle Ages themed action role-playing game that kickstarted what is now known as the Soulsborne series, and the genre known as Souls-likes. But this was not an immediate influence, nor was it an immediate success story either. No. Demon Souls, despite being a critical hit that was beloved by many who played the game, was a commercial failure, being such a disaster that its poor sales, which suffered them a major net loss, still ended up being considered overachieving and doing better than they initially predicted. Because of that, FromSoft gained a bit of faith in this style and a newcomer director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, who essentially saved Demon Souls' production. So with that, they gave them more money, more resources, and most importantly, more time to work on a new action role-playing game in the same vein. Originally thought of as a sequel, then turned into a spiritual successor, over a couple of rocky years of production, we ended up receiving the finished product in what is now known as Dark Souls, one of the most important games ever made in the last 20 years, and even one of the most important games ever made in general. I am playing every single Souls game on this channel in order of release and reviewing them in a retrospective and reflective manner on their productions and their standings within their franchise. Now, Dark Souls is not my first Souls game. No, it's actually my third. But even with my past experiences in Bloodborne, one of my favorite games of all time, and Demon Souls, an atmospheric experience that connected with me in more ways than I ever expected a video game could, I really could not have prepared myself for the absolute trial that is Dark Souls 1. I've always had an intrigue in these games back to when I played the first couple hours of Elden Ring and just had to stop myself because of how little I was getting the hang of it, and for years since then, I just sat around with the thought in the back of my mind, I would really love to play the Dark Souls trilogy one day, and now that day has finally arrived. But not only did I venture into playing it, I ventured as far as I could and played both the original PS3 version as well as the remaster to get the best and worst of both worlds, with me even getting the platinum for the latter version. I did all this before even beginning to write this video, as I wanted to make sure I had as true of an experience I could possibly get before actually getting into what my experience entailed. I did multiple playthroughs and multiple New Game Plus cycles to get as much experience and footage as possible, as well as just experiencing this game so much that it becomes more second nature to discuss and present it as faithfully as possible. I'm gonna be unbiased and go through pretty much all of the game's levels, bosses, and story, and just review all of it in a much more holistic, level-by-level style, just so you guys can experience my playthrough of the game along with me. But I will also be jumping ahead and going back into a lot of detail about the game's production and some background info on a lot of bosses, NPCs, story details, and overall themes to get more of a perspective of the game through an exterior and meta lens, as I think there's a lot to be learned about just from the game's background that further enhances just what makes this such a unique playing experience, and why Dark Souls became the masterpiece that it is now. So without further ado, let's begin the biggest video on this channel and enter Lordren with Dark Souls. Beginning your first playthrough of Dark Souls feels like walking into a dream that you can't wake up from. You're instantly given one of the most beautiful cinematics ever, detailing a mythology in this world that almost feels too epic and grand to simply be that of a fictional game, and not something straight out of real-life history. And that's especially because of all the real-world influence in both the level design of specific structures as well as the world's lore that Miyazaki studied in order to create as rich of an experience as he possibly could have, taking notes from both Greek and Japanese mythology to make something as detailed as what we have now. Yeah, I'm sorry, but if this isn't enough to hook you into the game already, I'm very sorry for you. But even if it doesn't, it's not unlikely that the first hour of the game absolutely will, with its fun first section and amazing level design from the beginning of the game and onwards. I think the Undead Asylum is a really great introduction stage with a fun boss and a nice little puzzle-like structure to its level design, where you're essentially just wrapping around the asylum until you make it back to the center and then out. You also get a bit of lore from Oscar of Astora, an NPC that I thought was really cool, especially after learning that he was supposed to have his own quest line. Yeah, this guy was actually supposed to be like your main rival in this game, which is kinda cool. You were supposed to basically journey with him through the entire game game and then fight him right before the final boss, as he will align with whatever serpent you don't align with. And I thought that was really cool, but I am kind of glad that that didn't happen, as it would make your journey feel a bit more decided in comparison to the end of the game that we actually got, where you can actually just, decide what path you want to take at the very end without having to think too much about what happened in the past. I started off my game in my first playthrough in the Warriors class, but in my next playthrough, and the one you'll see in most of my footage, I used the Knight class. And I picked the Master Key for my starting gift so that I could access certain areas early on and open up the world even more. I know people usually use this to skip the Depths and Blighttown, but I didn't actually go for that. Not right away, at least. I just wanted to see the Valley of the Drakes earlier and open up some of the doors that let me get stuff like the Gold Pine Resin before the Taurus Demon, and find Havel early on just to see if I could beat him. The answer? I couldn't. I didn't even kill Havel in my first playthrough. That's how bad I got my ass kicked. My ass got tooth slammed. This is the most dangerous dentist you're ever going to meet in your life. So yeah, I did use the Master Key, and whilst I didn't do any skips in this playthrough, I sure as hell did in my next one. It's hard to not want to just spend hours in one specific area looking around for whatever treasure, spell, armor set, ring, etc. that you can find. Because even with the small map layout of each individual area, there's still a lot to do and a lot of paths you can take. Dark Souls has been coined as a Metroidvania, meaning it features non-linear progression and structure in its level design. Areas like the Catacombs and New Londo are places you can access from the very beginning of the game, but since both areas follow a path that take you to one of the 4 Lord Souls, you're not actually expected to go to these places until the late game stage, when acquiring these souls become your main goal in the story, and when you're able to fast travel. Add on top of that, the enemies and obstacles in these areas are quite tough. New Londo features ghosts that you can't fight without either having the Transient Curse, an item you have to obtain through merchants such as Ingward, whom you won't meet until you're nearly done with the area anyways, when you don't really have to worry about the ghosts anymore, or through actually getting curse from the basilisks in the depths, or through Seath, which will also cap your health bar at halfway. They also feature Dark Wraiths, which are some of the toughest Night type enemies in the game, and one of the toughest and most fast-paced bosses in the entire game in the Four Kings. A fight entirely based in poise and speed, something you'll really need to up your levels for in order to get down right, because this boss hits like a truck. But I do have a funny story to tell you about the Four Kings later, so stay tuned for that because you're going to laugh. But with these obstacles come great rewards, for if you do decide to do these early on, if you enter the Catacombs and fight Pinwheel early, you'll have access to the Rite of Kindling immediately, doubling the max kindling limit on your bonfires and giving you 20 plus Estus, which could come really handy for tougher bosses in the first half like Quelaag and Nordstein and Smo. And if you beat the Four Kings, the only one of the final 5 bosses you can access early in the game without the Lord Vessel, you'll be able to join the Dark Wraith Covenant and follow the path of the Age of Dark after speaking with Kath, at least in a role-playing sense in the role-playing game, as, you can do the Age of Dark regardless of if you meet Kath or not, but in my opinion, I don't really think it makes as much sense if you don't meet him. As you all know, Dark Souls has 2 endings, the standard Link the Fire ending and the Dark Lord ending, but plenty of people go through their first time playing the game without knowing they even have the freedom to make this choice. You access the Dark Lord ending by simply leaving Gwyn's arena, but if you never encountered this somewhat of a questline with Kath, which majority of players did not, even to this day, you may not even know this could happen, as your first instinct is obviously going to be to just link the fire because, well, there's nothing left to do in the game. It's over now, so just link it. That's all that's left, right? Or can I just leave? Ignore it, let the fire die, and start a new age. Add on top of that, you've basically gone through this entire game practically being groomed by Kingseeker Frampt. Groomed into believing you're this chosen one, the one who must link the fire to save all of humanity and break the undead curse, which we know with later installments in the franchise to be a lie. But on its own, you won't know this. Frampt is friendly and talks highly of both you and Gwyn, leading you to believe this is the true righteous path. You're practically being groomed by a politician into believing the world needs to be this certain, unchanged way, otherwise we'll be doomed and cursed forever. Like the fire is the reason why everything will go back to normal when it's the reason why everything went to shit in the first place. And with no other path shown, you're likely just going to take this at face value on a first playthrough and believe it. Without meeting Kath, the ending of the Dark Lord doesn't make much sense, and yet when you learn of it, or if you learn of it, it creates an interesting philosophical conversation about the cycle of the world. The cycle of the fire, the gods, the dark sign, everything. Is it truly right to let this age of gods continue going when there are no gods left? Is it really the responsibility of humanity to continue picking up Gwyn's broken vase and continuously try to piece it back together after years and years of erosion? And is a world shrouded in darkness, a world that ends this cycle and begins something that we don't know what it holds, let alone if we'll be able to live in it, really worth breaking said cycle? That's a question that only you as a player can answer, and I love the mystery behind it all. It's so dedicated to the point that you need to take these loopholes and do these specific tasks in a specific order just to get to the point where you can engage with these discussions that the game has to offer. And it all comes together to really make me fall in love with how this game tells its story. It's why whenever I do replays of the game now, I always make the Four Kings my first of the four lords to fight and wait to place the Lord Vessel until after doing so that I can at least meet Kath. Even on playthroughs where I don't choose the Age of Dark, I much prefer to at least immerse myself into a story where I know my character has a choice. It brings more conflict and more debate into the narrative that would be entirely missing if you never even give yourself the chance to meet Kath and blindly listen to everything Frampt says. Because despite not being entirely honest himself, Kath is right that simply following the Age of Fire blindly, believing you're this chosen one handpicked to surpass Gwyn, when these serpents never even give you the light of day unless you ring the bells and obtain the Lord Vessel, and before this we were just some random zombie that just so happened to get saved by a random guy. It doesn't make all that much sense. Both sides have substantial arguments. It's like one long political debate, and your choice at the end of the game is the final deciding factor of which one you choose to put your faith in. It's not the objective right choice, but just the one that you decide to believe is the right one. Will you give up your power for a temporary cure to humanity's curse that said fire caused in the first place? Or will you choose to acknowledge it another day and embrace a new age where your kind are the ones in power now? Temporary peace and comfort for everyone who still has their sanity in this world, or potential chaos with a possible chance of breaking a cycle of oppression and curses? Is it really worth it to play it safe and pick the temporary solution, or would you rather risk it all for a possible permanent one? It's a tough choice to make, and these philosophical aspects are part of what makes this story so good. If we had simply concentrated on what was required rather than trying to experiment, I don't think something like this would have been created. In order to get this from my designers, I tried talking to them about all sorts of things. For example, I spoke at lengths with Nakamura about philosophy. This is a quote from Hidetaka Miyazaki in an interview from DesignWorks, which is going to be the main interview that we take excerpts from here, as it has a lot of information about the making of Dark Souls and the themes of it. We will be using other interviews that also talk to other people from FromSoft, but this is the main one we'll be using. A lot of Dark Souls' narrative is stuff you have to piece together or make up for yourself as you go along. It leaves trails that you can further push the barriers of to make for an even more rich experience. Typically, I don't like when a narrative is mostly told through vague NPC dialogue, but the reason why Dark Souls' story is so good and so rich in detail is because of its environmental storytelling. Every enemy placement, every creature design, every NPC questline, and the order of how you do them, even as far as where simple items are placed, tells a story on its own. And as a whole, it makes this world feel all the more real because of how much detail went into, well, everything. Every area tries to paint a specific picture of what this flame, what this age, and what these gods have done to this once beautiful world, and I think this little excerpt from Miyazaki's DesignWorks interview details a lot of this really well. You may not believe me, but I always tried to maintain a certain level of refinement and elegance in all these designs. I often told the artist that muddy or messy is definitely not good. I think this carries through the entire game. If you ask me to describe what this elegance is, well, I think you just have to look at the designs and judge for yourself, but it really is one of the most important factors in everything I oversee. I remember you said that to me when I was working on the Undead Dragon. Originally, it was covered in maggots, but you told me that instead I needed to try and capture the sadness of this great creature as it marches towards extinction. As I said before, everything had its particular shade or tone, Blighttown, for example, is the rawest, most disgusting area in the game, but looking at the area as a whole, I wanted it both to possess a deep sadness and to feel bitterly cold. That's the atmosphere I tried to build on. You could say that I have a habit of working in this way, and I think you can really see that in Dark Souls' art direction. And indeed, he would be correct about that, because Dark Souls famously has some of the best art direction in all of gaming. With such a cohesive yet tragic vision, every area and boss in the game has a distinct visual piece that tells you something no other boss in the game does. All except for the reskins, of course, but we'll get into the messier side of the production when we reach Lost Izalith. But even some of its less beloved bosses, like the Bed of Chaos, and ones that are a bit more forgotten like the Gaping Dragon, have designs you can't truthfully say you've ever seen before in gaming. And what they may lack in actual game design and quote-unquote fun, they can at least justify their placement in the game with their narrative significance and world building, because they add to that a lot. Although the Gaping Dragon is actually fun, that was more for the Bed of Chaos, but you get what I mean. But going back to my own playthrough of the game, I may have gotten 1 or 2 or a dozen early tips on how to navigate this game through my girlfriend, who basically listened to and watched me play through Dark Souls from damn near start to finish and was given the guidance to grab an early gem of a greatsword called the Zweihander, a sword that I used for pretty much, well, the entire game, because it's faster, easier to use, and lighter than all the other great swords in the game. And the best part of it all, you can buff it with resin, unlike most of the other great weapons in this game. So this became my go-to for basically my entire first run, though in my footage you'll be seeing me use the Black Knight greatsword as well, because it later became my favorite weapon in the game. After getting this sword that I couldn't use yet because I didn't meet the stat requirements, I made my way to the Undeadburg, a retro-feeling castle/dungeon area that immediately impresses you with the sheer scale and connective tissue of it all. Multiple shortcuts can be found in places you wouldn't have expected, both with and without the Master Key, and there's also just so many layers. Since I did have this key, I was able to loot the gold pine resin from the chest in the restaurant, something that surely isn't going to be useful for the literal very next boss coming within 2 minutes of distance from this chest, and then instead of taking the linear path, I went downstairs with the master key just to check out what I had unlocked. And with that, I was immediately humbled by the man covered in literal wet cement and got flattened by the gigantic dragon tip in his hand. See, I know a lot of people consider Havel to be a pushover when you have an actual decent level and weapon as well as just a tiny bit of patience, but god, do you really see how unprepared I was here? Even in my second playthrough, I did not beat Havel in my first run of the game, which means I never even had Havel's ring on the PS3 edition, which is arguably like the best or second best ring in the entire game. You think that's bad? I didn't even know I could ascend my pyromancy flame until my second New Game Plus run, where I was already abusing my power and kept getting confused as to why it didn't do as much damage as it did in other videos. And the answer was that I was simply bad at the game and didn't understand the mechanics, because of course you can ascend a pyromancy flame. You can ascend fucking everything in this game, so why would it be any different there? So anyways, after getting humbled by Wet Cement Man, I made my way past this really frustrating group of spear-piercing, flame barrel tossing, fireball throwing, way out of my level range enemies, and after a few attempts that didn't take an embarrassingly long amount of time, I got to the first post-tutorial boss of the game, the Taurus Demon. And I fucking sucked. I got slapped out of the arena multiple times, crushed by his giant chicken bone DIY make at home with the dead birds in your backyard axe, even got sniped in the back multiple times by this enemy at the top of the tower that I didn't even know existed because I was panic rolling so much that their arrows never even computed in my mind. But then that realization made me realize something else I could do. Oh wait, I can plunge attack this thing. So I tried and ate shit on my first attempt, and out of humiliation, I took a quick break. I promise you guys, I did get better at this game. Cause that's the thing with me. I am very sloppy with these games. I'm sloppy with every game. As it goes on, I start to get a bit more serious with trying to be more careful and precise with my dodges and attacks, but at the start, I am all over the place. If the boss is not so simple and weak that it's humiliating to die to in the first place, I'm going to die at least once or twice. I only had 3 bosses in this game that I beat in one attempt, one of them being the Moonlight Butterfly, and one of them being Pinwheel. And then the third one is so funny that I'm not going to tell you guys until we get there, alright? So just remember that detail, because I promise you it's going to be really funny when we get back to it. Anyways, I came back after a quick Slim Chickens break, fought the demon again, and also picked up the information that he was weak to lightning. So I drew him out again, gold pined my 12-incher, and plunged right down on that freak beast and made him my absolute bitch. Granted, I took way too much damage and was still panic rolling for the whole fight, but you know, a win is a win. No one cares about the conditions, they just care if you did it. And I did do it, so that was one boss down. Honestly, despite my suffer-sounding description of my first experience as well as my exaggeration of my poor skills despite the footage you're clearly seeing, I did not struggle that much in terms of combat with the Taurus Demon. With that being said, whilst I think it's solid in its placement to get you used to a slightly higher paced fight than the tutorial, I still wouldn't call it any more than just an okay boss, especially in comparison to what we get later. Aside from its ties to the Witch of Izalith thanks to its name as a demon and the fact that it is really thrown in your face later on in the game, its actual story is kind of non-existent, and mechanics wise it is extremely simple to learn without much of a learning curve to it, especially since its health pool is really small, so you're gonna kill it pretty quickly if you just know what you're doing. You're gonna spend more time trying to figure out how to deal with it in its narrow ass arena that I don't really think works for it all that well, especially because it can just straight up fall out of the arena. I don't think it's bad, but I do think it doesn't serve much value aside from being an early test to the pace and combat of the game. I much prefer all of the other early game bosses optional and mandatory. So for the Taurus Demon, I'm gonna give him like a 6.5 out of 10. I think that's pretty fair. I then went to the bridge in Undead Burg and met my my best friend in all of fiction, Solaire of Astora.
Now that I am undead, I have come to this great land.
I'm going to swiggle you, man. You'll hear me talk about him more later, but after meeting him, I made my way to try and cross the Undead Burg Bridge and died about 6 or 7 times to the Hellkite Drake until finally getting to the bonfire. The first 2 times I had to do a full run back because I didn't realize there was a shortcut through literally kicking the ladder down if you just went down a little bit. I also didn't go under the bridge because I thought it would take me somewhere completely different, and even though I was wrong, I still did it anyways. I got to the bonfire and finally decided to commit to a specific build. Aside from the fact that I was too scared to switch away from the Zweihander for all of my first playthrough, I also just have a very simple-brained mindset. I like doing damage. I like seeing big chunks of red turn into faint chunks of yellow that then vanish from the health bar entirely. The more damage my swings can do, the better. I am sloppy, I am a meathead. So I went for a primarily strength and endurance based build whilst also making sure I had plenty of making sure I had plenty of stamina and health too. I did end up putting some levels into faith and intelligence later on, but that wasn't until after I decided I was comfortable or near the soft cap with these levels. So with that, we now have a better basis of what my fucking tank of a man will do later on in the game. With that, I made my way through the Undead Parish until I finally met everyone's favorite shirtless smithing daddy, Andre. Damn, he's ripped. And even outside of all the usefulness of him as a blacksmith, it took me multiple playthroughs of this game until I realized that he actually gives you directional advice as to where to go in the game after you take some of his services. So for those of you that whine going, "Wah, this game is too complicated, how do they expect me to ever know where to go on the first playthrough?" Well, here you have it, so quit your whining. In all seriousness, it actually took me multiple playthroughs to actually start using his dialogue options, since I assumed he only ever talked about, infusions or items, boring shit like that, because he's, an old man, probably senile. So it never occurred to me that you could actually get cool character interactions from him, like learning that Siegmeyer and him have actually crossed paths before. And, that makes sense since his quest line literally starts at Sen's Fortress, which is just across the street from Andre. But, it still never even occurred to me that this could have happened because NPCs rarely ever mention each other unless their quest lines are directly connected to one another. So seeing that they actually do know of each other's existence is pretty nice for some subtle world building that you may or may not have thought about beforehand. I tried the gargoyles almost immediately, but ate so much fucking shit in my attempts to even head over there that I decided to save myself the rage and do some farming with the skeletons and red-caped hollows near the blacksmith bonfire for some extra souls. I quite enjoy the grind of bulking my characters up in this game, which some may consider to be quote-unquote playing the game the wrong way, or at the very least tedious. And my response to that is, fuck you, I like it. Everyone ends up overleveled in this game anyways until they reach their next dead end. So don't even try to get at me. I don't actually know if people get mad about farming, but I did it anyways, so fuck you all. Finally, I got my comfort level up and decided to head back to do the run back, and did not eat shit multiple times trying to climb up a ladder without getting infinitely stabbed and staggered by the most irritating enemies in the game, and made my way to the rooftop to fight the gargoyle. This is one of the first instances where you can summon NPCs in this game, as both Solaire and Lautrec are accessible for this boss fight, but in my first playthrough of this game, I didn't really understand the humanity mechanic, so I avoided using it unless it were for kindling my bonfires, because, you know, I thought that was the only thing they could do. So because of that, I was hollowed for majority of the game, along with the fact that summon signs are placed in the most inconvenient spots imaginable, so I fought basically every boss on my own in my first ever run of this game. How much help would I really need anyways? It's just one silly little gargoyle. There's fucking 2 of them? Okay, yeah, that caught me by surprise, and it also makes sense now why there were 2 different summoning pools for this boss, because when you summon, you're always supposed to be outnumbering the boss. I did not get the hang of this fight at all at first, as the only other duo boss fight in Demon Souls was the Man-Eaters, and this whole fight is kinda just that, but better, less bullshit, and smarter with the enemy AI, so I didn't have a real way to take advantage of anything, and still had all of the dread. I had to play by the much smarter rules of this game now, so I went for the tail first, got that sweet axe that I was then heartbroken to use afterwards just to see that it kind of sucks, and after an annoying and embarrassing amount of attempts, I got the very simple tricks you needed to understand down to beat them, because I was not paying attention to the details or learning anything in my first few attempts of fighting them. I just kind of went in swinging and didn't think. Like trying your best to separate them, and keeping them from using lightning attacks, bait one into doing fire breath while you go swinging at the next, and not distancing yourself too much so that they don't trample you. You know, obvious things that I somehow didn't connect with at first. It's a very simple boss fight, but on a first attempt I was quite jarred. I know people complain about FromSoft's duo or group bosses in a lot of their games, but at least here I liked the few that we had gotten. Gargoyles were fun, surprising, and whilst not exactly all that important as an entity in the narrative, they were the primary thing blocking the first Bell of Awakening, which is the catalyst for literally everything in this plot. So it is pretty meaningful. Overall, I'd give them a 7 out of 10. A good boss, but nothing amazing or crazy. I don't have much to say about Lower Undead Burg aside from the fact that it really pissed me off. I discovered why everyone fucking hates dogs in these games, rats in these games, and assassins in these games, and they're the main enemies you fight here. It is a nice looking area and you do meet another NPC here in Griggs, but to be quite honest, he's not all that interesting himself. He sells some pretty important rings if you're going for a sorcery / pyromancy build, but as an NPC questline, he is as bare bones as you can get in my opinion. You buy his sorceries, then he goes hollow, and you kill him in Sun's Fortress. If you play his cards right and get all of his stuff quickly, you can essentially finish him off within the first hour after meeting him, and I found that to be pretty underwhelming. I don't think Dark Souls NPCs are stacked across the entire board, but if we're talking about the few weak links, this is certainly one of them to me. Not everyone can be Solaire, but I can't help but wish I got a little more out of him as a questline, as Big Hat Logan is one of the best NPCs in the game, and other NPCs like Salaman and Quailana, who serve similar purposes with different mechanics, are 10 times better written. But I also can't expect every character in this game to be as well done as they are, so it doesn't bother me too much. Aside from that, the only thing to really do down here is to go on and fight the Capra Demon, who, you know, wouldn't be bad on his own, but his enemy adds as well as his terribly small arena that traps you in the moment you enter is one of the most miserable experiences you can face as a new player. I'm assuming this was all done intentionally to piss you off as much as possible, but I still can't help but feel that this is just going a bit too far. The dogs are infuriating to deal with, and you can do things perfectly and still get punished instantly, because there's not really a skill requirement here, just a luck requirement. The upside is that Capra himself is extremely easy when the dogs are gone, which leads me to believe that From Software just threw them in so that players didn't immediately realize how big of a pushover he was. With that being said, I still hate this boss. It is optional, but I don't like skipping Blighttown for reasons I'll explain later, so I did it anyways, got the depths key after a few very painful runbacks. The Capra Demon sucks. He gets a 3.5 out of 10, and there is no other discussion for that. With that being said, now that I have the key, it's time to finally go down to the depths. The depths were based around the image of an underground aqueduct, but its aesthetics are very similar to that of Undeadburg. It also shared the same lead artist, so the two areas really fit well together. I made my way to the depths and killed the butchers and struggled even more against the dogs before making my way down to Laurentius. And before you start going, oh brother, a pyromancy abuser, you would be correct for basically every run aside from my first one. Because, well, here's the thing. I didn't realize that rolling into the barrel he was trapped inside of was going to instantly save him despite every single action and roll in the game already confirming this. So, you wanna know what I did? I made the stupidest decision in my Souls playing career. Take a guess at what I did. Take a guess what I did. If your guess was me swinging the Zweihander right at the barrel to free him, you would be correct. So, yeah. I aggroed him, because of course that would aggro him. It would aggro fucking anybody. And thus, I locked myself out of obtaining a pyromancy flame and locked myself out of his questline. So for my entire playthrough of the PS3 edition of Dark Souls, I was locked out of what is essentially the easy mode of the game. Yeah, I could have just gotten one from the little egg boy later on, but he didn't sell the same pyromancies that Laurentius did, and since I decided that my chance was already sullied, I didn't allow myself to really use one and missed out on Quaylana's questline despite it being really fucking important to the story. But don't worry guys, I did end up doing all of this in my subsequent playthroughs, so I did get the story down later, just not in the first playthrough. And that's the thing here as well. You're very likely to miss a lot of NPC stuff in this game on your first and even second playthrough, as quest lines are essentially puzzles themselves. You're not meant to interact with all of them in one playthrough since some of them are basically just catered towards certain builds, and you have to backtrack a lot and obtain items and interact with other NPCs connected to one another in order to actually get the full picture, and some of them even have multiple endings to their story depending on how well you handle specific events.
No, you're kidding me. I didn't interact with him. I didn't interact with him. What are you talking about? Solaire, no. No. No.
With that, you could go basically the entire game without even completing a single questline and without interacting with any non-merchant NPC. This is certainly what happened to me in my first playthrough, as Solaire was really the only one I engaged with or didn't accidentally aggro. Hell, I'm probably the only person in history who went through the entirety of the game without knowing who Domhnall was. How the fuck do you do that, man? I'm such a fat fucking chud. But a part of this, maybe not to as extreme of a degree, is intentional, as Miyazaki and FromSoft wanted to keep the story in the background. Basically, we worked on the story afterwards. We started with the layout of the game itself with minimum story around it. It's story of the game before game for the story. So as long as it meets the game's requirements in order to create immersion for the player, it's all good. I wanted the player to experience the story, so we did not focus on making a linear storyline. I don't want to tell the story. I prefer the players to unravel it by using their imagination and our hints. We refrained from putting in too much information, and the hints were made vague in order to make the player become one with the story. We just provided information in certain areas to help stimulate the player's imagination. So for those who want to know the story, there are lots of hints. The question is where to find them. A lot of information is written here and there in item descriptions, so if they want to know more, I would like the players to read them. But anyways, after fucking myself out of a pyromancy and having to run for dear life to get to the door to the lower depths whilst trying to avoid getting burnt to a crisp by Laurentius because I suck really bad at fighting NPC enemies, I got to the depths and avoided doing, well, basically most of it. I have heard horror stories about this area and I wasn't ready to face said terrors. On replay, I've realized just how small and kinda easy this area is when you get more of a feel with what you're doing, but the problem with me is that I have extreme tunnel vision, so when you are putting me in a maze-like tunnel area, I'm going to suffer a lot. And in suffering a lot, yes, I did indeed get cursed by the basilisks. These little bug-eyed, fat-headed, disgusting frog-looking gremlins that have ruined my life way too many times. Genuinely curse you and your bloodline for making these enemies. You know the worst part of all this? These are like Miyazaki's favorite enemies. Yeah, I read the interviews. He loves these things. They're some of his most prized creations. He loves this thing more than he probably loves all of Dark Souls 3. So truly, curse you, Miyazaki. Or curse me, I guess, because I was the one who got fucking cursed. I thought I was screwed over forever, but I thankfully got got a purging stone after a tiny bit of farming. But these things are costly and not unlimited by any means, and 6k souls is a lot to give up in the early game, so I was definitely not happy about that either. So yeah, I just went straight for the boss. I didn't even kill the channeler defending it. I decided to take my chances with the magic soul spears coming down onto me while I slapped this gaping dragon's tiny little head until it was dead. And you know what? I didn't really struggle. I beat it in 3 attempts. I beat that worthless gaping hole and got that Blighttown key and did my little dance emo and made my way to the most infamous and accursed area in the game, even more cursed than the one that literally gives you the curse ailment. But going back to the gaping dragon, overall the boss was fun and it was easy to learn. Even though I technically made it harder for myself by not killing the channeler, it's really nothing crazy when you realize you just need to wait for it to slam its head down, get a couple hits in, run away, then rinse and repeat, and a couple of added dodge rolls just because of the channeling soul arrows. It's not fast either, so you can just sprint around in circles here and there and it'll all be okay if it's chasing you. It's a solid 7.5 out of 10 boss, and now that it's dead, you know what that means. That's right, it's time for the area you've all been waiting for. One of the most controversial places in all of Soul's history. It's time for me to go down to Blighttown. As for Blighttown, I started with the number of images that I wanted to incorporate, but due to the complexity of the area, it would have been difficult to try and design it all at once. So instead we began with large features like the water wheel, elevator, and, with the designers and artists, gradually built up the area from there. Yeah, the first part of Blighttown and the depths are planned to be avoidable. There are people who have a hard time with those places, but I really like Blighttown. And you know what, Miyazaki? I love Blighttown. That's right, I love it. I hate it, and yet I love it. I suffered so much here more than in any other area in the game, and yet it is so magically disgusting, painful, moody, and irritating that I can't help but just fall in love with it. An entire area full of puzzling platforming, poison enemies, dart-shooting hollows, and weird sluggish maggot monsters, as well as the most hideous enemies you've seen in the entire game. An area so intentionally unfair and hellish is one of my favorite areas in the entire video game. It is full of everything that I absolutely fucking hated about the Valley of Defilement in Demon Souls, and yet it does it all so much better. I love how infuriating it is. Maybe you need to be a little bit of a masochist in order to understand just how well designed this area is, but thankfully, that is exactly what I am. I love to suffer. It's an area that I think perfectly encapsulates what Dark Souls is all about and how it keeps you on your toes and second guessing your every move. It's so dark and bleak and wet that you truly feel this underground, unbeknownst world unfolding with little for you to be able to predict as it slowly eats itself away. It's a horrific hellhole that's full of suspense and keeps your sense of danger on high alert, even when you actually get to the bottom. I get that the staggering poison swamp can be annoying, but it is so worth it to me. In terms of look, it is so grimy and depressing. It truly expresses the feeling of the inhabitants in this story, a puzzling platform of whatever materials they could find in order to avoid this poisonous water, despite it being the only water they even have access to. The reason it's so hard to get down is because you're not meant to get down. You're supposed to go up. You're supposed to escape. It's a rotten, godforsaken cursed swamp, created as the result of the Witch of Izalith's corrupted family, poisoned by what could be the attempted recreation of the first flame, or possibly through experimental pyromancies like poison mist, which could suggest that Aingi, the little maggot man we met by the Daughter of Chaos, may as well be responsible for it. Which, you know, makes me feel less bad about killing him in my first playthrough, but that's neither here nor there. Regardless, this is one of the first instances of our introductions to the Daughters of Chaos, the cursed family of Dark Souls that makes for some of the best lore and storytelling in the entire game. And that is yet another reason why I love Blighttown. It's a perfect introduction to the sad, dark, and miserable story. One that isn't so tear-jerking but just numbing. Like Blight itself, something causing a slow, browning death, sucking life away. It did take me quite a while just to get past the first bonfire because, admittedly, this area is fucking pure torture. It's not always fun to traverse, and so I understand why people people skip them. Hell, I skipped it a couple times because it's very tense and extremely punishing. Even if you play very carefully, you might still get punished. But those are the terms you're going to have to meet this game with in the first place, which is another reason why I feel it's probably the area that represents what Dark Souls is all about the most. And, if you really don't like it, well then you can skip most of it. So really, what's there to complain about? It's a brilliant area and it features a brilliant boss as well. One of the best and most unforgettable early experiences in the entire game with Chaos Witch Quelaag. Quelaag was another character I always had a pretty clear image of. The truth is, there is an old board game called Dragon Pass which I really love, and in the game there is a special unit called the Crag Spider. All it is a tiny chip with the name, parameters, and a small silhouette, but for some reason it really stuck with me. Although she developed into something quite different, that's what the inspiration for the character came from. It's not just Dragon Pass. I love all the old tabletop games and game books. My copies of Titan and Out of the Pit remain some of my most treasured possessions. I wonder, personally, this is also the case with Ceaseless Discharge, I'm not entirely happy with the way she turned out. I think we could have improved both their behavior and the way they are introduced to the player. She spoke at one point, didn't she? Yes, she did, and perhaps with a better script we could have made it work, but I felt like the character lost something, so we quickly took it out. She's actually one of the few completely silent characters. I fucking love Quelaag as a boss. Could that be partly because of some very specific features? Maybe, but mechanically, she is a great boss fight. Easily the best one up to this point in the game in my opinion. It's perfectly paced, she has plenty of openings to take advantage of without being too exploitative, as her attacks are hard-hitting, deadly, and have a lot of AoE that'll punish you for being greedy, and her arena is pretty good as well, gives you a lot of freedom to fight. Not to mention, I just really like ladies with fire powers, who doesn't after all, so that's an extra point there already. In all seriousness, I do love Quelaag, and her design is mesmerizing. And no, it's not just because of those hair-covered entities being out in the open for all with eyes to see, but because it creates a half-beautiful, half-monstrosity that depicts just what this demonic curse has done to this family, what her mother's search for a flame of her own had done to her, and as we go further into this area, we'll see she isn't the only one to suffer this fate, and certainly isn't the one who got the worst of it either. This was the first boss that really made myself want to test and practice my own actual skill in the game, rather than just playing passive-aggressively, as it will take you a while to deplete her massive health bar without the right equipment, which I did not have, so this was my chance to really play offensively and it helped me become a much more skilled player in Dark Souls. Guess you could say me and her were doing some stamina training. I'm sorry, I'll fucking go away. Great boss, she gets a 9 out of 10, my favorite up to this point in the game, but not my favorite in the entire game, which you will see later on. After defeating Quelaag, I rang the second bell of awakening and joined the Chaos Servant Covenant and got my Pyromancy Flame from Engi because, might as well have one even if I'm not really gonna use it. And a few of you may be wondering, I have not once mentioned a specific NPC, quite the important one at that, in this entire video. Well, I've said his name, but nothing else about him. One that not only has a very important questline, but will also give you a very important ring and will likely lock you out of resting at Firelink if you do not kill him early on. But yeah, don't worry, I knew about that. I kicked Lautrec off down to Blighttown the second after I rescued him. He's been dead for hours in this playthrough after all. By like the 5-minute mark of this video that you've been watching, he's been dead since then. In fact, in the 5 playthroughs of this game I've done so far, he's only ever lived past introduction once, and that was only because I actually wanted to finally do his questline in New Game Plus 3, which only really has like one extra step to it, so don't really know if I gained that much more out of keeping him alive, especially since you kill him anyways. But with that, it's time to go back to the Undead Parish for Sen's Fortress. Sen's Fortress. Oh, Sen's Fortress, how you chastise me so. This is such a miserable area. I don't even know how I managed to get through here, as navigating it on its own is a battle itself. Enemies are placed in the most inconvenient spots. You're either dead on arrival when you fall off the paper-thin platforms, or you're food for Titanite demons. There's boulders falling onto you, lightning bolts tossed at you by bleed-dealing serpents. You gotta deal with this fucking pinball machine that resets every time you leave the spot you turn it at because the fucking giant that throws the balls down is the only one of them that respawns after you kill it. Then you have another giant that throws fucking exploding fire bombs onto you while you try to get through the rooftop area because it clearly would have been too easy if you didn't have that obstacle. And it will also throw them down during the boss fight if you don't kill him first. Even the bonfire is in kind of a mean spot because you can very easily fall off the map with the wrong step or over-rolling. Yeah, I don't have to be the one to tell you that Sen's Fortress is brutal. Everyone has said it, everyone will say it until the end of time. This is one of the hardest spots in the entire game. But you know what? It rocks. It's a very trial and error map that breeds as the perfect testing grounds to determine if you're truly ready for Anor Londo. This place exists to pretty much determine whether or not you're even worthy enough to just be able to walk on the same floors that the gods once did. Not even still do, just once before in the past. So it's clear why it's so heavy-handed in traps, narrow paths, hard-hitting enemies, and careful item placement. It also makes sense as to why you see so many NPCs here as well. There's a merchant, you meet Sigmire here for the first time, you rescue Big Hat Logan, and it's where you kill Griggs after getting all of his sorceries. So many people here, and yet none of them actually get out unless you get them out yourself, because that's just how brutal it is. Sen's Fortress and Anor Londo were both overseen by Mr. Waragai. As for me, I had a definite visual image right from the very beginning and a concept behind the area, i.e. the trial to reach Anor Londo, full of deadly traps. The designers had real trouble with this area, I seem to remember. We spent a long time on the rough map. The image of a trap road was fairly straightforward. The pendulums, rolling boulders, and the other major traps were all there from the very start. In fact, we almost tried hard to make them obvious and create things that screamed trap. It's almost comical how obvious they are, but I think things like that are all part of Dark Souls' appeal. Personally, I love the stone launcher, the way it endlessly fires the boulders and the strange complex contraption to achieve this simple action. It's things like this that really add a sense of intrigue to the Dark Souls world. In terms of achieving the original design aims, I think this area works really well. And so it makes perfect sense that the boss of this brutal area is somehow, by far, the easiest part of the whole level. Granted, if you don't kill the fire giant, it'll be a fucking hell house, but nobody is dumb enough to do that. I was dumb enough to do that on my first playthrough because I didn't know where the other giant was until my third attempt. But you know what, I persevered anyways. He's definitely much easier if you play Demon Souls because he's essentially just a slightly more tanky and more layered version of the Tower Knight, and a few different and more versatile attacks here and there, but if you beat him in a lot of the same ways, and you can also cheese him, though I didn't do that because I didn't know about it at first, and I also just don't like to cheese bosses because that feels cheap. He's a fun, solid boss, but nothing all too crazy to me. If you fight fairly, he can be a tough challenge, but in subsequent playthroughs, I have not struggled against him really ever. I'll give him an 8 out of 10, but with that, it's time to make our way to the final area of the first half of Dark Souls 1, the land you've all been waiting for, everyone's favorite spot in this whole game, the heavenly land of gods, or better yet, the decrepit land of lies, Anor Londo. Before we get into Anor Londo, my girlfriend has requested that I incorporate an important take of hers into my script. And Dark Souls 1 is her favorite Souls game by far, so I find it very important to include it here. Ahem. Blighttown to Sen's Fortress to Anor Londo is the best 3 area run in the entire Souls franchise, and anyone who disagrees will not survive the winter. Feel free to argue with her in the comments, just please do not hate on me for it. She said it, not me. Though I do agree that it is the best run in this game, so. Arriving in Anor Londo for the first time is one of the most otherworldly and breathtaking experiences I have ever had in gaming. You spend all game going through what's essentially a dying world. Castles and towers are covered in moss and mold, showing that no one has been around to care for or work on these infrastructures in what could be centuries. Inhabitants have gone hollow, and all exteriors are either abandoned, run down, or left to wither with hollowified zombies being all that's left. And yet here we have this golden city with the most beautiful, golden sunlight you have ever come across. The city is perfect, pristine, conditioned to be a flawless paradise for the gods, whilst having the defenses to emphasize their power as well. And yet something is very, very wrong here. As you arrive, you notice so much of it is entirely empty. The only enemies you'll come across on the outside are these giant knights that are still minuscule in numbers, and these disturbing bat-winged demons that brought you here to begin with, and now strangely want to kill you. The only NPCs you will meet are a firekeeper who tells you nothing about the city itself, and Gwendolyn, who forbids you from ever seeing him or the Tomb of Gwyn. You can either join his covenant for a Dark Moon ring and miracles, but if you enter his arena, you will immediately trigger a boss fight that, if you win, will also provoke the firekeeper to attack you, locking you out of the bonfire after you kill her. Gwendolyn, despite being a much more gimmicky boss, is one of my favorite fights in the entire game, in both a lore and design perspective. Anor Londo is essentially their playground to reminisce and hold on to the final strings of power that they have left in the world. The gods are gone. Hell, his own family is gone. It's just him and no one else, yet he's holding on to it anyways. From what we know, Gwendolyn was a son of Gwyn that was raised as a female, hence his attire and very okay, I'm sorry, but look, you can't fucking blame me here, alright? You know, I'm less attracted to Gwendolyn in a sense that I want them, and more attracted in the sense that I desperately want to look like them. Take that information as you will. But with his upbringing, you can feel a sense that he likely only ever lived for the others in his family. This level of royalty and divinity is likely all he knows, as he likely never had any true connections in his life. Hence why he clings so desperately to his position and the family that gives it to him. Despite them all being gone, Gwendolyn, unlike the rest of them, is not only still standing, but he has nowhere left to go. The rest of the world is dying or already dead because of his father, so even if he did find a new place to call home, it would be unlikely many places would welcome him despite his power and position, and they're worse off than Anor Londo is anyways. This is all he has left, and it makes his character all the more tragic to me. He is an optional boss and one that you can very easily miss at that, but because I like the gimmick of essentially playing a long game of red light green light with him until you either somehow reach the end of the hallway or catch up to him enough times to drain his health, I always fight him in every playthrough. I find it thematically resonant that his character is so childish that his boss fight is essentially just a long game of tag. But of course, I also leveled up in his covenant to get the items needed for the platinum as well. And that brings me to a part of this game that I haven't really addressed yet, but also haven't really seen many other people address before either, and that's Dark Souls 1's covenant system. I don't really like it here. I'm admittedly giving an unfair and biased opinion here because not only am I not much of a Souls PvP person, at least not with this specific game, but I'm also primarily speaking as someone who just used these because they were required to grind for trophies. So I was already a little annoyed with this system to begin with because of the amount of items and spells that were locked behind covenant walls. I find them tedious because of just how little of a single player presence they have. You can go the entire game without caring for or dealing with covenants at all, which means you can just ignore the system entirely. But that also feels like a waste to me. The only time it ever feels like there's something helpful to players in the actual base offline game with covenants is when maxing out the Chaos Servant covenant and it grants you access to the Lost Isolus shortcut where you can also save Solaire and get the true ending to his questline. Outside of that, it just feels tedious and dry to me. The rewards are certainly worth it, but it still doesn't feel all that present or complex as a system for me to really have interest in it. It just feels kind of bare bones. And I especially hate the mechanic that leaving and joining a different covenant will split your offerings that you had likely grinded hours or even days for in half. So you'll have to get the max rank and obtain all rewards before even entering another one if you don't want your grinding to go to waste. This isn't present in future Souls games, so I think they learned from their mistake, but it is present here and I find it very unnecessary and very unfair. Some of these covenants are just kind of unnecessary as well, they just don't matter. The Cat Covenant gives you its one and only reward just through joining, so like what is even the point? And Way of White and Princess Guard don't even have rewards in the first place, so unless you're just really good chums with Fake Guy Gardner or just really want to roleplay as Guinevere's simp bodyguard, which I mean is honestly pretty understandable, there isn't much of a point to joining or acknowledging them in the first place. Maybe there's a better, more thorough perspective I'd gain from these if I'm just more of a PvP person, but I don't know. I just don't really think I jived with it all that much with how absent they are to the actual, mechanics of the single player and to basically all the NPCs. It's especially annoying that if you really do want to 100% the game, you'll have to discover all of them, join 6, and achieve max rank in at least 5 of them. 2 of which require 30 humanity, which is just kind of ridiculous to me. But I do understand that I have a very twisted and narrow-minded view of this system, so if anyone disagrees with me and has more to say about it, you're probably right, and I'm not gonna argue with you. It's just not my cup of tea, and that's okay. It's just an opinion, and we disagree. That's okay, right? You guys are gonna be nice to me in the comments, right? But I do promise that this will be especially prominent of a point in my Dark Souls 3 video. Oh yes it will. I have a lot to talk about with that system. Oh boy, you guys are not ready for that. But back to Anor Londo, because that's where I'm at in the game. I've only actually talked about the optional material in there, but that's also because it's a much more open area that you can easily get lost in. It's a place too big for you. It's an area that makes you truly feel small in the grand scheme of things, and that's an important detail that went into making it. There was a lot I wanted to fit into Anor Londo. As I mentioned before, I wanted it to feel like a reward after finishing Sen's Fortress, but I also wanted it to be an area with no clear road, to have the player walk in places that you wouldn't normally walk, such as the buttresses. Then there was also the image of the setting sun, and the way the area changes once night falls. I really like the way your eye is drawn to the different features like the revolving staircase elevator. Nakamura comes up with some strange things, doesn't he? I mean that in the best possible way, of course. I think this worked out really well. There are several spirals in the area, and I'm glad that we were able to incorporate that idea. There was one more thing I wanted to achieve with Anor Londo. The last game I directed, Demon Souls, was based in the early Middle Ages, so it was extremely difficult to gather reference materials for the area designs. Dark Souls is based in a later time period, so with Anor Londo, I saw a chance to create an area that felt more cohesive and full of the kind of detail that we couldn't achieve in Demon Souls. But don't let any of this beauty and vastness and kindness and warmness and niceness fool you, because Anor Londo fucked me raw. Every single enemy in this fucking level has killed me at least once, and maybe twice. I got flayed, ragdolled, electrocuted, backshot, front shot, penetrated, and clipped by every single opponent that this place has to offer. There are not many breaks offered here, as the kingdom has some of the most troubling and intimidating platforming and puzzle-like progression in the entire game that you will just have to run through many times on a first playthrough just to finally get to the boss fog. And once you finally do enter that grand cathedral hall, you are rewarded with the ultimate challenge the first half of the game has to offer. Your first taste of what true godlike power looks like in the Dark Souls universe, Ornstein and Smough. Ornstein and Smough is by far the best boss fight that the base game of Dark Souls has to offer, and I don't think there is a single fight that even comes close for me here. Some may be near a similar tier, but nothing quite replicates the technical perfection of this fight and the multitude of ways it can play out, with the differentiating phase 2s depending on which one you kill first. There is already double the replayability with this fight off new experiences alone, and the two fighters complement each other so well whilst never feeling like a mismatch for you as a player. It's incredibly hard and difficult to learn, and yet it never feels unfair. Even my pea-brain, whilst fighting this boss for over 3 hours with little success in the first phase, understood that this was just a skill issue and I needed to get good. I did end up going for the easier path to victory by getting the Crystal Halberd, which does insanely better damage on these two compared to the Zweihander, but I needed to actually fight them correctly to have any luck with this method either. I was getting super frustrated with this fight because even the pillar method wasn't doing me enough favors. I ran through my Estus quickly, and I was all out of humanity, so I couldn't cheap it out with a summon. I was truly stuck. It was truly time for me to master this fight and get it right. And after a full day of attempts, I was finally able to get it down, and I managed to kill Ornstein and start the Super Smough fight. And you want to know the funniest part of all of this? I beat Super Smough first try. I didn't die to him. I don't think I've ever died to him in any of my attempts, in fact. Even without Estus, he was free 99, and even with his tankier health pool, I managed to kill him on my first try in the second phase. I did not sleep this day, I will tell you that. I was up until 4:30 a.m. I remember the exact time I beat them for the first time like my own credit card number. Truly a perfect boss. They are an easy 10 out of 10 and one of the most rewarding experiences in this game, because not only are you blessed with Melon Mommy right after, but you obtain the Lord Vessel and get to feel good about yourself because you just defeated the two greatest defenders left in Anor Londo. Or did you?
Thou that tarnisheth the Godmother's image, I am Gwyndolin. And thy transgression shall not go unpunished. Thou shalt perish in the twilight of Anor Londo.
None of Anor Londo is real. Not Ornstein and Smough, not Guinevere, not even the beautiful sunlight that once shone on this paradise of a city is real. It is all an illusion made through the power of Gwyndolin, which puts our own victory against Ornstein and Smough into question. Sure, Smough was likely real, but we have lore to let us believe that Ornstein was never here in the first place, as he left long ago. So did we really beat him? Was this illusion even as strong as the real Ornstein? Perhaps he was, because Gwyndolin may possess even greater powers capable of replicating his, but we will never truly know. Regardless, this city is all a lie, a farce that Gwyndolin only pretends is real so he can relish in his lost glory. That's also why he wants us to link the fire, because even though the gods won't return, the Age of Fire remaining means that he'll remain in power. His status won't be meaningless, and that means a potential future for Anor Londo could still exist. And this puts into play some of our first potential suspicions that linking the fire isn't really all it's set out to be. So much of it is built on lies of a promise for a better world for humanity, but the people it truly benefits are the gods that remain and their allies. Gwyndolin, Frampt, all want us to believe a lie so that this age can continue. So maybe, just maybe, the Age of Dark is the true correct path. But is it? Is that the right choice either? Is there even a right choice in this world at all? Is there anything we can do to break this cycle? Anything we can do to avoid being a slave to fate? This is yet another wonderful expression in the philosophical nature of Dark Souls and why it's the conclusion of the first half of the game that makes it so brilliant. So then that brings us to the controversy, the second half of Dark Souls, something that no one can agree on the quality. So do I think it's good? Do I believe the hype of it? Am I an apologist for this section of the game? Well, it's complicated. Dark Souls' second half is controversial to say the least. I've heard stories, many stories in fact, about the supposed deep dive off of a cliff that this game suffers after you obtain the Lord Vessel. And after playing this game multiple times and experiencing it from start to finish more than enough times to get a good enough feel for the flow of the game, I don't really see it. Nah, I actually still really like the game and the hunt for the 4 Lord Souls quite a bit. Now, I will say that there is certainly a bit of a dip in consistency in the level design and overall funness in the game after you obtain the Lord Vessel, and there are some parts that are definitely as bad as they're said to be, but for the most part, I still really enjoyed my time with this game, even if I did get a bit more annoyed with it than I did in the first half. I will say that I am still counting the Painted World as well as New Londo Ruins as second half areas, as even though you can access them from the beginning, it is still relatively unconventional and rare to go to these places in the first half because of the fact that going to the Painted World requires a lot of steps that you're likely not going to pick up on in the early game just because you're too focused on other areas, and by the time you reach Anor Londo you just can't go there unless you have the doll, which 90% of people don't when they first arrive, and even when they do, it's unlikely they even go there at all. Not to mention, scaling with the Asylum Demon is a bit more late game-ish rather than early game-ish. And then with New Londo, well, most people don't even bother because of how difficult it is to even attempt in the early game. And these two areas, along with the Duke's Archives, are both areas that I can safely say that I quite love for many reasons I'll get to later. But as I mentioned before, there are areas that I kinda have to agree with the community on when it comes to just how irreparable its reputation is, and that is the first area I decided to enter within the second half of the game. That's right, the infamous Lost Izalith. Now, due to it being a Metroidvania, Dark Souls allows you to go in basically any order you want to go in when it comes to obtaining the souls needed to complete the Lord Vessel and open up the Kiln of the First Flame. So, why did I choose to go with Lost Izalith as my first? Well, I didn't. Not on my own, at least. It was actually my girlfriend who told me to do it just so that I could, quote unquote, get it over with. And here's the thing about Lost Izalith. It sucks, alright? It just sucks. The moment you leave the Chaos Chamber and head into the Demon Ruins after defeating Ceaseless Discharge, you're immediately met with the stupidest, silliest enemy placements and sloppiest level design I have yet to see in a FromSoft game. If anything screams, this was fucking rushed, this is it. I am not the first, and I sure as hell will not be the last to tell you this. Once you enter the Demon Ruins, ruins, the first boss you will meet is Ceaseless Discharge, the one and only son of the Witch of Izalith. And unlike the rest of his sisters, he is the one member of the Izalith family to be born cursed, having never had a physical humanoid form to begin with. He exists only as an amalgamation of magma and sores, a form that keeps him in constant agony. Interestingly enough, you only provoke his boss fight when you rob what seems to be the corpse of Quaylana, which provokes him as you've now defiled the body of his dead sister. In his eyes, you're nothing more than a grave robber. But the thing is, Quaylana is alive. His sister lives and rests right outside of Blighttown, and even wants you to put her siblings and mother out of misery, which will have you rewarded with the Flame Tempest Pyromancy, arguably the strongest one in the game. So, in all seriousness, this entire battle is begun as a misunderstanding, as Ceaseless tragically believes that all of his siblings must be lost now. We have killed Quaylag, who knows if he even knows that the Fair Lady is still alive, and he doesn't know of Quaylana's survival and even escape from being cursed like the rest of her siblings. They all live in constant suffering, and Ceaseless has it the worst. He was born knowing nothing but pain and despair, and yet he still seems to love his siblings, and here we are taking what isn't ours and killing him like the rest of them. It's easy to see why he would want to kill us, but you can also interpret it as us putting this cursed family out of their misery, and I find that to be the most befitting of our character regardless of if we follow the path of darkness or the path of the flame. The Witch of Izalith is one of the 4 Lord Souls we have to get, and her family stands in our way. But they aren't here because they want to be, they just have to be here because this land is the result of their mother's sin. So if anything, we are showing them mercy by ending their suffering in this burning hellscape. All demons are born from the fire of chaos, but he was the first, born so long ago when the fire wasn't yet stable. He possesses it, but he can't control it and burns constantly. Despite his size, he's actually the youngest of Izalith's children. He stands gazing up at the ruins where his sisters live. The only source of comfort in his pitiful, painful existence is the belief that they are watching over him. There are a huge number of things that, while present in the game, we make no attempt to explain to the player, and many more that they simply have no way of finding out. The Ceaseless Discharge's story is just one of those. I recall the main difficulty designing the character was trying to get across that sense of sadness. People just couldn't see past the fact that he's just a flaming giant. One of the few things that I can say really redeems Lost Izalith in any way is the story beneath it. There are some amazing moments scattered around here that makes this somewhat worth it. You receive multiple meaningful questline interactions with Siegmeyer and Solaire, and depending on how you approach it, you can actually end both of them here, which is likely how most people did it on their first playthrough. But you can save both of them to get their true endings to their quests. And to the people who claim that the Sunlight Maggot is the true ending to Solaire's questline, I have reason to believe otherwise. Aside from the fact that I love Solaire and want him to be happy, there is an interview excerpt from Miyazaki that I believe contextualizes a bit more in the favor of the Gwyn summon. About Mr. Solaire, isn't it impossible to finish his story if you play normally? Yes, it's impossible to do it without hints. For Solaire, there's a shortage of hints in general. To be able to fight alongside him in the end was pretty much a secret. We expected Solaire to be taken over by the Sunlight Maggot as the general norm. But anyways, in this case, and in others, the conveying of hints is a subject we need to work on. This is another topic, but we should work more on achieving goals in the game regarding both locations and objects. We should try to include more ways to present clues, as it is my personal taste. I just think there are more ways to convey hints. Going back to Solaire, it's really a secret, and I think the happiest ending for him is to die by becoming the sun. He's happy, he becomes the sun. This here leads me to believe that this is the true ending for Solaire's storyline, at least as true as it can be, as, of course, it is an RPG that is extremely vague. So technically, both paths can be canon, but I also don't believe there would be such a convoluted method of saving him if this weren't the case. In fact, I think the complications in saving him is what makes this feel like the true end to his character for me. A lot of Dark Souls NPCs suffer the same fate. If you involve yourself with them too much, they will all end up suffering a tragic fate in death or going hollow, and I find that a little repetitive. So I like that we can have an antithesis here in Solaire, who represents purpose and perseverance in this world full of people who lose their willpower, and nihilists who can only keep going through the misfortune of others or through avoiding connection in any way. I believe we need at least one Solaire to get a good ending to balance it all out. Otherwise, it feels all too bleak to be engaging. As for Siegmeyer, it's more obvious though, as there is still quite a lot of questline find a cover after the fight with the SpongeBob things if he survives, so we know that his quest is supposed to continue past this point even if you fail to save him. And regardless, he will still meet his end, so there's no true saving Siegmeyer solution. Rather, there is just a way to prolong his life and possibly give him some level of solace in seeing Sieglinde again and discovering Ash Lake. My point with Lost Izalith is that it features some pretty amazing story beats, but that also makes it so much more confusing as to why it's so badly designed, and why it wasn't, one of the major focuses of the game when it's just such an important area. Despite Ceaseless bringing up and continuing one of the most interesting storylines in the game, he is extremely underwhelming as a boss fight. He's tedious and bland at best if you try to fight him normally, and if not, then you can just cheese him by luring him to the fog gate, hitting him a couple times, and triggering his death in just a few seconds, as this is a scripted fate for him if you break him here. And that is literally everything with him as a boss. There isn't even any real thrill in trying to run back to the boss fog, as he doesn't even have any deadly moves, and with the positioning of the area, you aren't gonna find yourself trapped or knocked over. That's just not gonna happen. It's legitimately just free souls and a free win to your count, which makes me wonder why it's even a boss fight in the first place. You can see somewhat of a vision there, but there definitely wasn't enough time in the kitchen, and when you do kill him, you're able to actually go through the demon ruins, and it's just laughable. For Ceaseless, I give him a 5 out of 10, and for what comes after him, well, we can see it here. When you get down to the demon ruins, you can choose to go over here with a bunch of Taurus demon copy and paste to get some loot as they all chase you with their giant chicken bones. Yeah, fuck that. Or you can go the correct way to progress through the level and fight 6 Capra demons literally lined up to fight you with no intelligible placement. It just feels like they were thrown in here. I mean, it makes sense why they're in the level because they are demons and they all belong to Izalith, but like, are we serious here? This is just bad. The upside is that you can roll under them to get to the bonfire, but I still can't help but find it to be so pathetically lazy. And speaking of lazy, the next boss you encounter, that being if you don't skip it entirely through the Chaos Covenant, is the first, maybe second depending on your play order, of the Asylum Demon Reskin Pandemic. The Demon Fire Sage is an extremely underwhelming way to begin what should be one of your most anticipated areas in the game. When it comes to the 4 Lord Souls, there clearly seems to be more care in regards to writing put towards the Chaos family, and it feels as if the more story focus an area got, the less time there was to actually cook in development and in the design process, as now we have a boss that is only won through a cheap exploit, a poorly designed runback with copy and pasted enemies from an old boss, and now a reskin of the first boss of the game. A different moveset at the very least would have made things a little bit more fun, but it uses all the same attacks plus maybe 1 or 2 added AoE based attacks and some added flames to other attacks that really won't make all that much of a difference if you just remember how to fight the first boss. Granted, it took me a while because I sucked at this game on my first playthrough, and his one exploding attack really fucked me over a dozen times thanks to my poor poise and fire resistance, but eventually I beat him. Overall, a really annoying and irritating inclusion of this game. I give the Demon Fire Sage a 5 out of 10. The Asylum Demon itself is a great boss with decent moves, so it at least has those, but it's inferior because it's a reskin in a more important area and its only new moves aren't fun or creative, not to mention the arena is just so much worse. To add insult to injury, you're thrown right into another boss fight after just a little bit of walking with nothing of value to find to fight the Centipede Demon. And this thing is just a bit better than the Demon Fire Sage, but the biggest issue here is that its biggest hurdle is something that you can't be expected to control. You better hope you have a lot of health because you'll need to walk over a bit of lava that instantly drains your health down to low to get a reasonably sized platform to fight the boss, and even when you get there, there's a high chance it'll just spam its reach attack without even stepping on the platform. And in that case, you can't do anything. You either have to cut its tail or kill it entirely to get the orange charred ring, and if you go for the tail cut method, you'll immediately see how much of a pushover it is. It has just a couple of jump attacks that feel satisfying to learn, but it doesn't feel like enough to be truly memorable, especially with it coming right after a bad boss and coming right before the worst section of gameplay in the entire base game. So overall, I guess a 6 out of 10 feels fair. I mean, I think that's fair. I don't know about you guys, but I personally find that to be more than reasonable. And now, with that, it is time for the Lost Izalith speedrun, because nobody ever tries to spend more than a few minutes in this area without wanting to bash their fucking skull into their console. First, we talk to Solaire. Make sure you've killed those maggots or use the poison cheese to kill them through the door, or you will get him killed. Then you're gonna run through lava, a lot of lava, a lot more lava, but don't worry, you have the orange shard ring, so you'll just die slowly instead of instantly. But it's okay, because it's balanced out by the army of charred headless birds scattered around the area with infinite aggro and infinite AoE. And if you think that's too easy, don't worry, because these things will one-shot you. Get a great hero soul, the only great thing in this level, then go to the illusory wall to get the bonfire. Otherwise you'll have to run through this bullshit all over again. Make sure you're playing the remaster and not prepared to die, because those chickens will definitely spot you trying to run up the branch. Go up there, avoid the fire-breathing statues, avoid SpongeBob, fight Kirk, then fight the Pyromancer. This is supposedly yet another daughter of the Witch of Izalith, but don't worry about it making sense because she literally doesn't matter. And now that this is over, you can either willingly explore more of this area. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. Why would you do that? Nobody fucking does that. Just go down into the boss arena, and now you can finally witness the climactic point of this whole Chaos family storyline. The final boss of Lost Izalith, the Bed of Chaos. Boy, I cannot wait for the... I hate this stupid fucking game, man. Fuck this fucking bullshit. Fuck this dumbass fucking game. After all of the buildup of the Chaos family and the children of Izalith, building up this tragic story of a family cursed by the sin of their mother that not only created this hellscape, but the demon race itself, we are met with what is possibly the most disappointing, underwhelming, and mechanically horrid example of rushed development in this entire game. And I mean, let me just let Miyazaki explain some of it himself. That's the truth. There were quite a few. When deadlines were closing in and I couldn't get a good mental image of what I wanted, but we had to settle on something, those situations were the hardest because I knew something was wrong, but couldn't express what I wanted and couldn't give a solution. That was difficult, both for me and the artists I was working with. I suppose the Bed of Chaos is the principal example of this. It's a shame, because in concept, this is a great look and idea for what the Witch of Izalith became. This giant tree monstrosity cursed with two of its own children to exist in this entity that you cannot even say is truly alive, just existing in pain and misery. It's terrifying. But the issue here isn't in its story, but its technical execution. This storyline and these areas suffer from having great ideas but terrible and rushed execution that never really expresses the ideas it wanted to go for with full commitment. It's so messy that they willingly give you a checkpoint every time you take out one of its corners until you kill it. It is the only boss in the game that will hold your hand because that's just how shameful it is. And Miyazaki and FromSoft knew this to be the case. Never once when you hear anyone involved in Dark Souls talk about the game will they express any joy when the Bed of Chaos is brought up. In fact, I bet you that if you walked up to a FromSoft employee that worked on Dark Souls and asked them what they thought of the Bed of Chaos, they're just gonna shoot you in the back of the fucking head. And the worst part is that there was a really cool idea for a much more complex and fairly challenging battle hidden in here that got removed in development. It seems that you designed King Izalith at one point too. What was that like? Ah, yes, evidence of the twists and turns we went through. Initially, he was going to be the boss of the area, the Bed of Chaos lying sprawled on the floor and waves its hand about, but he was a king sitting on his throne. That's right, we really had trouble with that. I've already talked about quite a few aspects of the game I'm not entirely happy with, but I'd have to say that my greatest regret is the Bed of Chaos. The artists and designers worked extremely hard and came up with some fantastic ideas, but it exposed a real problem in our production method. We had no way to find a common goal and work towards when things went wrong. It's definitely something I want to correct in the future. And whilst I don't know if this idea would have worked entirely either if brought to life, as with most things that simply didn't happen and we will never get to fully see realized, it would have at least brought us something we didn't expect or know beforehand. With Quelaag, the Fair Lady, and Quelana, you are built up to expect something disastrous with the Bed of Chaos, but once you defeat Ceaseless, you are given nothing else despite there being so much level left to explore, with pretty much no actual substance scattered around this massive pool of shit. It lacks in rewarding moments but is chock full of punishment. And the only reason why defeating the Bed of Chaos is satisfying is knowing that you won't have to deal with this piece of shit gimmick boss again. It is a million times worse version of the Dragon God from Demon Souls, with its only upside being that you don't have to reset from the beginning with each attempt. It is a 1 out of 10 boss. It is god awful, and I refuse to give it more grace than that. It is terrible, it is dog shit, we all know that, so let's all just move on. But that is where Lost Izalith ends, and unlike the early half of the game, we can simply just go back to Firelink and begin our journey to the next Lord Soul. So let's jump to what I decided to do next in this game, which is grabbing my second Lord Soul in the Duke's Archives. Unlike Lost Izalith, one of the most miserable, unbalanced, thrown together areas in gaming that I have had quite the displeasure of witnessing, the Duke's Archives is actually a pretty damn great level that continues off of the perfection that is Anor Londo. But unlike the very open box that is Anor Londo, the Duke's Archives feels much more like a maze. It essentially feels like one big escape room as you're quickly overwhelmed with the amount of channelers and crystallized enemies. I don't know about you guys, but the sheer amount of enemies in this area leaves me so overwhelmed that I kind of just run around willy-nilly rather than actually fighting, because you're too outnumbered with too much of a variety of attacks in both close and long-range distances. This is probably the second easiest area in the game to get ganked in. At number 1 we will talk about later, and so I just did not bother with these enemies in most of my future runs because I have terrible directional awareness and always ended up luring them into the worst possible spot and backed myself into a corner while 10 crystal sword swinging aid zombies tore my precious behind apart. You don't actually spend too much time in the Duke's Archives before getting to your first fog gate, and you'll be tricked into thinking that this is just another example of rushed short level design when you're suddenly introduced to Seath the Scaleless, the next Lord Soul. Except you can't hit him, you can't fight him, you just die. Yep. Scripted death time. Kinda surprised it took us this long to get to a scripted mandatory death in the game, but I am all for it because the Duke's prison is extremely fucking cool. Yes, I am one of the people that thought they were soft locked from the game here because maybe I missed an item that was supposed to get me out of here, as there was no fast travel or key inside of my cell, and for the first time ever, my girlfriend straight up just didn't know what I was talking about when I kept telling her I got soft locked in the Duke's Archives. Turns out I was just an idiot, as I literally just needed to kill the guard right outside of the cell. An enemy so free to kill that it dies with a low health pool and will open your cell even if you don't one-shot it to get the key, which if you don't one-shot it, then you are definitely way too underleveled for this area. Okay, no you're not, but still, I do a lot of damage. I want you guys to know that. This is also where I want to say that I really like the enemies in the Duke's Archives despite my initial annoyance. It does have quite a few reuse enemies like the guards from Sen's Fortress and the channelers found in the Depths and Undead Parish, but at the very least they make more sense here and actually add a level of complexity to the levels themselves. In Lost Izalith, you're essentially walking in a straight line whilst fighting Capra after Capra, boss after boss, no real thought process needed, but here in the Archives, the placement of the channelers makes it so that you're required to go through this area with a bit more strategy and roundaboutness rather than just rushing to where you're supposed to go, because chances are you're going to get lost anyways if you try to rush out of here. It forcefully slows the pace of the game down and makes you think about each floor you go to, each left and right turn you take, each staircase you move, because there's not only so much good loot to get here, but you'd essentially be robbing yourself of the incredibly fun puzzle solving experience this level provides if you just run and run and run. It's one of the areas that punishes you the most and best for trying to just rush away from enemies, since there's at least 1 or 2 around every corner. They're not placed to an annoying and insane degree, but you definitely want to take them all out because they will bite you back in the ass if you try to skip them. This is why I personally love the Duke's Archives, because it really pushes its terms and conditions on you and forces you to acknowledge the way the game wants you to play. You can exploit a lot of things in Dark Souls, but the Archives are pretty barred off to me. That being, if you don't just use the Duke skip that a few people use, but why rob yourself of this amazing area? I don't get it. I don't understand. This is also where you get to complete one of the best NPC questlines in the entire game with Big Hat Logan as you free him here. You buy the rest of his sorceries now that he understands more about the Crystal Curse, and then right after, you start to witness his plunge into insanity. Then, after defeating Seath, if you go back to a scripted death arena, you'll be met with Logan, entirely naked with nothing but his big hat, preaching how he's reached full enlightenment and will stay here forever, leaving us to have to put him out of his misery. But fun fact, this is not an example of hollowing in this game, it's quite the opposite. As to why I made him naked, I wanted to show that the character had found enlightenment, but unfortunately the models in Dark Souls weren't built with a wide range of emotional expressions. So as I was thinking about how to overcome this problem, for some reason, I came up with the idea of making him naked. It's Logan's goal to gain the power of the ancient dragons, so in order to do this, I had an image of him casting off his human clothes. It's similar to using the dragon head or torso stone. You have to remove your equipment. Of course, there are gameplay reasons for this too, but there was also this image of the player leaving something of their humanity behind. Similarly, Logan removing his clothes is his attempt to bring himself closer to Seath in some way. Although I couldn't take his hat off because no one would recognize him, but personally, I like to think that unlike the followers of the Path of the Dragon, Logan sought to gain the dragon's power while retaining his pride as a human. And I really like this detail and this difference in how his character turns out compared to many others. Sure, he still follows the trend of NPCs who we essentially just lead to their deaths, but at least in Logan's case, there's a bit more irony here. He got everything that he wanted and ended up losing his mind from the sheer scale of what he had discovered. After all, this explains the Crystal Curse, basically all sorceries in the game, and many more. And now, he's arguably the most intelligent sorcerer in the entire Dark Souls universe, aside from Seath, of course. But with said knowledge comes a loss in humanity. It's likely that even though he didn't hollow here, he probably would have at some point anyways. So even though we cut his newfound happiness short, who's to say if keeping him alive after his plunge into madness would have brought any good to the world? After all, it directly mirrors our very next Lord Bull boss, Seath, the last remaining ancient dragon who had already gone mad a long time ago due to his countless experiments and developments in this crystal sorcery. He not only seemingly created the curse that depletes half your health, but also created nearly all sorceries in the game that aren't pyromancies. And as we can see with the hollows in the archives, a lot of people are no more than victims of Seath's torment, and I think that gives us a good idea of what fate had in store for Logan if we hadn't killed him. He went mad just like Seath, and that led to nothing good. But after completing this puzzle and saying one last goodbye to Logan, if you choose to, you can leave the archives and make your way out to the Crystal Caves. Every last area in Dark Souls has to have at least one controversial thing about it, doesn't it? A lot of people hate the Crystal Caves as much as they hate Lost Izalith, but I find that to be an extreme exaggeration in my opinion. I will say this area is a lot more cruel on the PS3 version because it doesn't include the message drops in the middle of the invisible floors and doesn't have those little frosty smoke things on the ground that guide your way, or maybe they do and I just didn't notice because I was playing offline and my TV sucked, but I really did not notice it on that version of the game, so I'm going with my gut to just say it wasn't there. But the remastered version makes it a lot easier in my opinion. I think maybe just having these invisible platforms that you just can't see at all is a little insane, but once you learn it for the first time, it's very unlikely you'll ever have trouble here again. Not to mention there's a lot of reward in taking some time to explore this area, despite the hardships like Titanite slabs, souls and shards from the moonlight butterflies, etc. In fact, the most annoying part about the Crystal Caves to me wasn't even the platforms, it was the fucking clams that crowd and gank you right outside of Seath's arena and can even follow you into the boss fight for whatever fucking reason. The platforms were tame in comparison to this because I really hate these fucking clamshells. And that brings us to Seath himself, and I gotta say, it is a really cool first impression when one of the first things you see when entering the arena are the crystallized statues of other players who died of curse buildup while fighting Seath. That has to be one of the coolest details that are kind of easy to miss or ignore if you're not paying attention, because I know most Souls fans don't actually pay attention to anything outside of boss fights, so, they cancel each other out here. As for Seath himself, I gotta say, at this point, I was starting to think that I just wasn't going to enjoy most of the Lord Soul bosses at this point, because I don't really like Seath that much as a boss, if I'm gonna be perfectly honest. And it's not awful like the Witch of Izalith where it's just mechanically terrible on all fronts, I just kind of find him boring. He's slow and conservative, and if you have really high health or the curse bite ring, then you just don't even need to worry about defense for the fight because you tank the curse buildup pretty easily and take him out before he takes you, as his health pool isn't anything to widen your eyes at, and his only resistance is to sorcery, so I guess if you're a magic build, then I guess this is tough, but as anything else, it's a pretty big pushover. If he hits you with his crystal breath head on, you might be a little worried, and you definitely should move around the map a bit so that he doesn't do that, but otherwise this fight just feels kind of tedious in my opinion. His only attack to worry about is his tail swing, and all you need to do to avoid it is just not be behind him when he does it, and whilst the Moonlight Greatsword is a very worthy reward for taking the risk with his tail, it wasn't something I prioritized until I started taking the Platinum run seriously, as I did not care for magic until New Game Plus 3. So maybe it's a matter of perspective, but Seath is a pretty free fight in my opinion. If you play your cards right, then there isn't all that much of a learning curve to him since his moveset is as simple as you can get. He's not awful like the Bed of Chaos, but he just isn't anything crazy. Especially since Curse by this point in the game is just kind of a fad and already lost its shock value to me when I got it the first time in the depths, but I will say he gives some of the best spectacle of the game, as the Crystal Caves are a pretty cool arena. Having to cut his immortality is a nice little starting goal. He's a pretty huge boss, and the scripted death at the beginning, which I do include as part of the boss encounter, is pretty cool. So whilst mechanically I find him pretty mid, I think the spectacle makes up for just a bit of that. Overall, I'd give him a 6.5 out of 10. I was thinking of a 6 at first, but he is better than the Centipede Demon, so there's that. I wish we got more story out of him, as he seems awesome, but there just isn't much there. It's kind of surprising how little you actually get to learn about Seath in this very long level, to be honest. Otherwise though, I really did like the archives and the caves, and the Duke's archives all the way down to Seath is pretty enjoyable, even if it ends in a boss fight that I just kind of find pretty mid. But with that being said, it's time to backtrack a little bit. That's right, it's time for an intermission as we stop doing our Lord Soul search and decide to do some side missions. As you can see with this video, I have a bad habit of putting off basically everything I don't need to do right away until the very last second when I should have done it way sooner. I corrected my mistakes in the later playthroughs, of course, but you are seeing it firsthand here that I went back to the Asylum long after I even obtained the Lord Vessel. Granted, there isn't much else to say about the Undead Asylum as you just explore the same area, kill Hollow Oscar, and then get the doll for the Painted World, but I figured I'd include it anyways so that we can talk about the third Asylum Demon reskin with the Stray Demon. And this one is even more shameless because it is literally just the Demon Fire Sage but with a different coat of paint yet again. In fact, it's basically the same design as the Asylum Demon. Yeah, at this point I've said everything I could possibly say here about this boss fight. It's cool that the arena is at least a bit better here, but otherwise there just isn't a single thing I can say about the Stray Demon because it's not its own thing. I've fought this boss before twice. I've already fought the shittiest version of this boss. I'm giving it the same rating as the Fire Sage because even though it's slightly less annoying, it is certainly more exhausting because it has more health. It's cool to at least get a cool little secret boss and a secret return, but like, come on now, this is all you had in store? Despite this complaint, I still have fun with it, and I still always have a good time going back to the Asylum because it's just a really good area, and it's cool just doing the fight anyways. But yeah, that's my Asylum revisit, and now it's time to head back to Inner Londo and enter the Painted World of Ariamis, an area that I had no idea you were essentially locked into until you finished it. Meaning I was stuck here until I figured out where the fuck I needed to go. But you know what? It's okay, because I absolutely love the Painted World. Snow areas are always my cup of tea already, which could be subtle foreshadowing for some unfortunate circumstances in my Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 videos, but at least here, I loved it. I really love this area and its design. It's a world specifically designed to hold the freaks and geeks, the outcasts of the Dark Souls world, deemed either too dangerous or too disgusting for even the hellhole that is Lordran to house. So they've either been banished here or willingly arrived. So of course we see some disgusting enemies like phalanxes, toxic pus-filled hollows, these weird crow humanoid freakazoids, and much more. I am really confused as to why there are bone wheel skeletons here, considering they're just in the catacombs in the real world, but I guess these guys in specific were just the victims of bullying, I guess. These are the loser bone wheels, even though all bone wheels are losers because they're fucking annoying. I'm going off track here. Then again, there are also regular hollows here, so I guess we're just reusing assets for the structure, which I can't complain about. What I can complain about is the fact that you can't fucking kill these hollows without getting toxic buildup, and this area is designed in a way that makes it pretty much impossible to get back to the bonfire in time once you've suffered it. They're everywhere anyways, so you either gotta deal with it or try really hard to evade them unless you have ranged attacks, which I didn't in my first playthrough, so I guess it's a skill issue. This area has an incredibly small map, but it makes up for it in just how intricate and complex its pathways are. You do a lot of ascending and descending to multiple floors, which makes it feel bigger than it actually is, and there's so much more loot and unique items here that it feels worth it to go around every little corner. Once again, there's reused assets, but most of the enemies are new, which makes this area feel especially unique. And then there's also so many shortcuts to unlock and a puzzle to solve that really puts this whole thing together. And if I didn't say it already, this area is probably the most stunning place in the game on a visual level outside of Anor Londo. It just looks grossly magnificent and treacherously ravishing. It really fits perfectly in the game on a thematic level despite being so separated from everything in the base game since, you know, it's a different dimension basically, a world within a world, which is pretty interesting because this was actually one of the first areas in the game that was designed. But it had to be incorporated this way as there wasn't really any way it could connect to the rest of the world. Every Dark Souls level connects to one another with environmental assets that starts as a little thread and slowly expands into an entirely new atmosphere and grounds of which to travel, but with the Painted World there wasn't really anything to actually needle that thread with. So the best way to go was here, and I kind of like the little bit of metatextual stuff there, since this area is full of nothing but outcasted freaks, beings with no place in the actual world of Lordran. So it makes me wonder if a lot of other enemies in this level were also originally going to be scrapped before Miyazaki decided to toss them in here. It's kind of like this big Frankenstein's monster of a level full of all these random ideas and designs, and I really love that from both a narrative and a meta perspective on the game's standing. We drew a great deal of concept art for the Painted World. It was actually based on the map we used in the Dark Souls prototype. Of course, the prototype is your chance to really get your vision for the game across, so we spent a lot of time on the area. So much that I really wanted to use in the full game, but I couldn't find a way to make it fit with the other areas. In the end, I cheated and put in the Painted World. It's the only area with snow, so it would be hard to put it anywhere else. Yes, it may sound like a poor solution, but I actually had an image for the Painted World from the start. I'm just happy I was able to combine that image and the prototype map. It was here you decided to put the former heroine Priscilla, wasn't it? Yes, I think she works well here. She's kinda snow-covered after all. But I also think that the Painted World is this place where someone who's being chased might go to escape, and she fits that description. There's an annoying bridge run and a crazy mini-boss fight that you have to go through to progress, but none of it is too crazy, and in all seriousness, this is about as hard as it's required to be since you don't actually have to fight the final boss of this area. Priscilla is one of the most fascinating characters in Dark Souls in many ways. She is the only optional boss in the game that is only activated through provoking her with an attack. Every other boss fight begins naturally, but with her, she will give you the option to just leave and go back to where you belong, as this world and the inhabitants of it just want to be left alone. She's essentially the mother figure of this world, and it's not really our business to interfere if this is what she truly wants, as from what we know, she's here entirely on her own accord. The gods of Lordran feared her power so much that this world was created primarily to house her and her power, as she holds dark and occult magic. Hence why we can find occult spells, weapons, and even the Dark Ember here in the Painted World if you look around enough. Everything the gods feared was put in this world, and thus a lot of powers used to try and kill them now reside in this painting. Never to touch the real world again. Priscilla knows this and is at peace with this, as she doesn't desire conflict, just a place to reside within in peace. We don't belong here, and we are also not a god. So realistically, we have no reason to fight since we have an open opportunity to go home. And yet you can still provoke her boss fight and kill her. And you guys are gonna get mad at me. Given the option to either go home peacefully or get a cool dex weapon that also gets me a step closer to the platinum, I decided to show Priscilla my own coat of paint. I'm referring to blood, not a... Yeah, fuck it, I'm demonetized already, who cares? I fucking killed her and took her dagger. She's actually a pretty solid boss fight with all things considered, and her little gimmick of going invisible, making you have to carefully track her footsteps so you can get an attack in, is something I found to be pretty cool. With that being said, I was well over over-leveled for this fight, and Priscilla has an incredibly low health bar since she's supposed to be a more gentle figure, and you're also not supposed to feel good about doing it in the first place. Did I enjoy taking her life? Not really. Did I regret it? Not really. No. I got my trophies and that's all I was satisfied with. It doesn't make as much sense to kill her from a story perspective, but neither does killing Gwendolyn, and that twink's been dead for hours, so now it's time for me to take my reward and go back home. I would give her boss fight a 7.5 out of 10 because she is pretty fun and the ramifications are certainly felt, but I also wish she had just a little more health as it goes by a little too fast for my liking. But anyways, fun fact. You heard a little bit about this from my last interview excerpt, but did you know that Priscilla was actually supposed to serve a much different role in the Dark Souls story? And when I say different, I mean way different. Like practically the main character / NPC of the game kind of role. She was described as the quote-unquote heroine of the game and would exist within Firelink Shrine, possibly as an upgrade girl like the Emerald Herald, Maiden in Black, and the doll. This leads me to believe that occult magic and maybe even Velka themselves would have played a much bigger role in the game in the early stages of development, but that all inevitably got scrapped and Priscilla was instead turned into the Maiden of the Painted World, which honestly adds even more to my take about the Painted World being a more meta representation of all the ideas that Miyazaki didn't fully explore before being sent into this limbo-like state. Yes, I had an image of people gathered around the bonfire from the very beginning. Getting back to the subject, Firelink Shrine was one of the first places we designed. It's a small area, but it connects to many different places and has many hidden spots. It was a very enjoyable location to create. It was made to connect with areas in every direction. In fact, we had to remove some routes in the final game, as well as some other things. Initially, Priscilla was the heroine of the story and was going to be there. That's not really something I want to talk about just yet. Priscilla is certainly the most beautiful character in the game. Thank you. She was the heroine of the story at one point, so I'm glad you think so. I really do wonder what this could have led to. A possible questline, covenant, maybe even a potential new boss fight with her that carries more weight in the themes of the game? I guess we'll never know, but it's fun to speculate. Alright, now all of that optional material is done, which means it's time to finally head back over to face my next Lord Soul boss. Well, first, I gotta get through the catacombs first. So that's where we're heading to now. Now, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you guys, I really do not think that I have ever completed the catacombs normally. At least, I don't think I have. Hell, I've never even fully discovered all of the bonfires down here. That's how I know I have not explored it fully. So I want you all to take at least some of what I say with this area lightly, as I don't have that much to say about it. It's the one area that I still feel like I have a lot more to discover, as the main things I've ever done down here is take the easy route to the blacksmith and take the easy route to the Gravelord Covenant for the platinum. So I have explored and gotten everything that I need, but I haven't really just walked through everything. In my first playthrough of the game, I fell off of the edge thanks to the skeletons that you can't kill without a divine weapon or unless you kill the pyromancers, which is a really fucking annoying gimmick, but I digress. And I ended up falling onto a platform near the bottom that didn't actually kill me, and so I decided to make that my primary method of getting out of the catacombs. Also, my girlfriend said that that would work anyways, so I listened to her. Sorry, but if they didn't want me to take this route, then they shouldn't have made it so damn easy. I did in fact do the catacombs more and more correctly with each given run, so please do not get angry with me, please, please, please. And again, because of that, I don't really feel like I've gotten the best experiences out of this area. I'd feel weird to talk about it in as much detail as others, but what I can say is that the whole labyrinth full of undead skeletons and creepy pyromancers is a really cool and fun way to design a level, and the platforming aspects of it, whilst not perfect, are still more fun than the platforming in basically any other Souls game, even though I think Blighttown did this aspect better. You meet the goat slime demon Patches and meet a creepy and very rude blacksmith who will contribute to your platinum, and that's about all I have to really say here. Narratively, there isn't that much to say because when it comes to the Lord Soul boss at the end of this part of the journey, well, we'll get to it more later, but Nito isn't exactly a character with a lot of backstory or depth. He's just a dude that brings death, and that's, well, everything. I mean it, that's all. Even while digging for cool interview excerpts to discuss for these areas, I literally just found nothing for the catacombs. All I got was one quote of Miyazaki going, "Oh yeah, it's like Blighttown but more man-made," and that was it. Come on, man. Give me something. I need something for this video. I will also say that this features some of my least favorite enemies in the entire game. I really find it annoying that you need a divine weapon just to be able to stop being bothered by the same skeletons over and over again. And with the abundance of them here, it becomes nearly impossible to actually go around at your own pace without one, since you can get up to 10 chasing you within the first minute of the area. I get that this is just the gimmick of the area, but I hate it anyways. Eventually, I gave in and just started using a divine club against them, but I hate that. Let me use my normal big sword without consequences. Fuck you, Miyazaki. Fuck you. And that isn't even getting to the worst enemy in the game in my opinion, which are bone wheels. They are just unnecessarily heavy hitting and will one tap you within 2 seconds even if you have the literal hard cap in HP. I get it, I suck at the game, but I just don't fucking like these enemies. I am sorry. On every game cycle, all 3 characters, I have done multiple runs in so far now, I have just not enjoyed going through the catacombs because of them. Is that the point? Yes. And the funniest part about all of this is that the boss you fight in this area after suffering through hordes of skeletons, bone wheels, and whatever the fuck those meshy things are, is the biggest fucking joke of a boss in all of Dark Souls. That's right, it's pinwheel time. I mean, pinwheel's free. What else am I supposed to say here? You can kill him in 4 hits. The summon can 2-tap him. But if you genuinely need a summon for pinwheel, then I think you might need to reconsider what games you play. It's hard to really review pinwheel as a boss because it is difficult to ever stay in his fight for more than 1 minute as he has less health than most regular enemies in the game. But what I will say is that his arena essentially being this creepy, bone-filled lab where he conducts his experiments for unknown reasons, potentially to restore his family or even cure his own deformities, it's pretty awesome. It's a really cool arena design that was used on a joke of a boss, which is some pretty funny irony. I think part of this is intentional to make you feel rewarded for making it through the hell that is the catacombs, as he is basically just a pedestal for you to take the rite of kindling from. But I also feel like he's just insanely unbalanced to be as easy as possible because they expect you to, for some reason, do the catacombs in the early game, even though no one would ever do that because the run back without the Lord Vessel is literal hell. Overall, Pinwheel gets like a 5 out of 10 I guess. He's not bad in any way, but he's so easy that it's near impossible to have any thoughts outside of jokes for him. He's very standard, very easy, very forgettable, and that's it. So we're moving on from him. And that means it's time to get to the Valley of Darkness, aka the Tomb of the Giants. Now, you better pray to God that you went to Lost Izalith and either saved or killed Solaire already, because if you don't have the Sunlight Maggot, or a torch, or something to guide your way once you get to the Tomb of the Giants, yeah, have fun with that, man. Tomb of the Giants is one of the most interesting areas in Dark Souls to me. In writing this video, as well as with my constant replays and preparation for it, it became more and more clear to me that one of the big reasons for the shift in reputation between the two halves of Dark Souls is that the second half of Dark Souls goes straight into committing to the experimental mode, with essentially every one of the final 4 levels having these wild, crazy gimmicks that will drive you insane because of just how unfair they are. In Tomb of the Giants, you can't see shit. In the Crystal Caves, you can't see shit. In Lost Izalith, you can't walk on shit. In New Londo Ruins, you can't hit shit without a timed curse or HP having curse. With this, I can definitely see why a lot of people consider these sections of the game to be a lot more unpolished than the rest of it. And at least in that sentiment, I can give them my agreement. These areas are rough around the edges, but for the most part, I like it. Especially in Tomb of the Giants. I really love how eerie the atmosphere is as things just go pitch black. Not just darker, but just full-on darkness. Raising your brightness won't do much of anything, and I love that. It makes this area feel like a horror section, especially with the fact that every enemy here is 3 times your size, and you're left to speculate what species some of these skeletons even belong to. I know it's called Tomb of the Giants, and giants themselves are a race within Dark Souls that are very important to the lore, but like if you look at these guys and then these guys, yeah, these are not giants. Maybe descendants of them, but these skeletons are definitely not giant skeletons. If anything, they resemble the size of the Black Knights and Anor Londo Knights more than anything. So really my theory here is that these skeletons are remnants of inhabitants of Anor Londo that have long died since all the gods are now dead or waiting for us to kill them ourselves. I think it makes sense as Nito was an ally of Gwyn after all, so it would make sense for him to watch after and possibly work together with the souls and graves of the warriors he once fought beside. There isn't much for me to go off of here as I'm only using a size comparison, but I think it's a neat theory that explains it better than just going, hey, they're giants, when we all know what giants look like and these are definitely not them. But no matter what they are, they sure are creepy and tanky. It's part of why I really like this area. I love that creepy, eerie atmosphere. It's scary, it's messy, you have to watch your step, and it definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. I do think the giant monkey enemies are a bit annoying in their spamming moveset, and the enemy placement could certainly be better, but in terms of general structure of design, I do enjoy going through most of this level. The obligatory Patches Betrayal here is fun and rewarding, and there's a few extra spots you can go to for some rewards and embers. I do think it runs pretty short for my liking, which is a little sad, because overall I find these areas to be the biggest examples of undercooking in terms of substance. There really just isn't that much meat to these areas, and by the time I got to the end, I just couldn't help but feel like there could have been so much more. There could have been more lore, more expansion on the skeletons and what they are, more expansion on why Pinwheel has a piece of Nito's power, more expansion on Nito himself and what he wants exactly. He just exists as an entity of death, and motivations are practically non-existent in speculation as there is no character to go off of. Even in his covenant, he's dead silent and doesn't speak. He's practically dead in there. This makes me feel like this was a conscious decision, but for once I'm gonna have to disagree with the direction they took with him, as it makes him feel one note in comparison to the other bosses, which is really disappointing. It makes the inevitable boss run to Nito feel all the more underwhelming despite it being one of the worst runbacks in the entire game, thanks to all the skeletons, pinwheel vestiges, etc. Not to mention the fucking 20-story fall you have to take just to get inside of his arena, meaning you will never start this fight with full health or full Estus, which is just unfair and unnecessary to me. And when it comes to the actual fight with Nito, I mean, it's okay, I guess. It's not as annoying as Seath, but I can't help but find his moveset kind of lame or at least underwhelming for the literal Grim Reaper. His Gravelord Sword Miracle is admittedly pretty cool and a really awesome way to utilize audio cues within the combat of the game, and I kinda wish that just ended up being the whole gimmick for his fight, because a battle entirely dependent on how you pick up sound cues would have been awesome. Anyways, Nito is a pushover for most of the fight, and this fight kinda sucks the life out of me. Get it? It's just overall kind of and a little bit too overwhelming for me, and not in a way that feels rewarding either. So I'd give Nito a 6.5 out of 10. Kind of on a weird streak right now with these Lord Soul bosses, huh? Have I actually liked any of them so far? Let's hope at least one of these guys gives me something meaningful. I also want to give a shout out to Ash Lake as well. It's more of a secret area where you don't do much outside of fight another Hydra, but I actually found that to be much more fun than the initial Hydra fight in Darkroot, just because there's kind of more to it, especially if you're running around the place. Then you finish Siegmeyer and Sieglin's questline, and then you meet the Everlasting Dragon with the option to join its covenant and cut its tail for another rare weapon for that platinum. But then, something about this area screams that there is much more to it than meets the eye. Why does it have a Hydra protecting it? How did Siegmeyer find it? What exactly is the Everlasting Dragon? What are these skulls around the place? A lot of these questions don't actually have a concrete answer or really any hints towards them. Even less so than a lot of the other vague storylines we can make up as we go along. Ash Lake is just a mystery, but it's allowed. Heavy-hitting score is more than enough to tell you that there is much more to this area than meets the eye. A level of significance, like you've discovered something impossible, and that's what we did, in fact, do. From what we can tell, this could very well be the deepest layer of all of Lordrin's world. The furthest descent in the entire world of Dark Souls, with the Archtrees possibly acting as support for the world above. It's vast and wide-reaching, spanning further than our eyes can even process. Still burned thanks to the Witch of Izalith, hence why we have an entire beach of ash. This is a secret area for a reason, which makes it all the more curious as to how other characters like Domhnall of all people knew about it, but Gwyn didn't. Or maybe he did? as with the Hydra and clams there is a possibility that Seath himself was studying it. It wouldn't hurt after all. The everlasting dragon isn't exactly alive after all. It's just in a strange limbo state where it cannot consciously process anything. It's a strange case with these beings far beyond what we're supposed to be able to comprehend, and it's clear that Seath likely wanted to know more about it to explore his immortality. This is also where we learn of Siegmeyer's death. Having lost his purpose after constantly needing to be saved by us, this is one of the more tragic moments in the story, as all Siegmeyer wanted to do was prove himself as a warrior, but every interaction we have with him only proves that he isn't the cunning knight he truly wants to be. Constantly getting himself into trouble, we always have to save him, and his moment in Lost Izalith was his last chance to prove himself as worthy to us, to die as both a hero and as a friend. This is the purpose he always wanted, but time and time again, we prove that that just isn't who he is. And because of us constantly saving him, we end up being his ruin in the process. He falls into despair at Ash Lake and goes hollow, losing all that purpose he set out for, and not even being able to reunite with his own daughter before his fall, despite the message she wanted to deliver to him. This is probably my favorite ending to a questline in all of Dark Souls. Solaire is my favorite NPC, but Siegmeyer is probably the one that hit me the hardest because no matter how we try to work around it, the only way this could have been prevented is if we never came into his life to begin with. Sure, he may have gotten himself killed or gone hollow eventually, but at least he would have died with some level of purpose and belief in himself still left. But here, that's not the case. This is all just for me to say that I really love Ash Lake as an area. I really dig it. It's a simple, secret area that's just really cool with a lot of really awesome lore and mysteries. And like, if you don't care about lore and all that jazz, then you may just find this place boring and nothing more than a path to get to a strength boost from the Dragon Covenant. But to me, it's much more than that. Also, best score in the game, easily. I love how much louder it is than the rest of the game, making you really feel just how important and unbelievable just discovering this area is, because yeah, it's a treacherous run to get there, and even more treacherous to get back if you don't have the Lord Vessel. So yeah, don't go here until the late game or you might be fucked. You might just end up like Siegmeyer going hollow here because it's just that tough to find and that tough to get out of. I just wanted to give it some flowers in this video because I honestly had no idea where else I could have put it in this portion of the video, so it's here. Anyways, on to the next area. So before we can head into New Londo Ruins, we're gonna have to get an item needed to actually access the Four Kings boss fight without dying. And this is where I begin to preach to you all that the Darkroot Garden and the Darkroot Basin is the most underrated stretch of level design in the entire game, and one of the most, if not the most integral area in all of Dark Souls. Like, think about it. You have to come here in order to even get access to Abyss Walking. You have to come here to beat the Hydra in order to access the DLC. It turns into Ulasil in the DLC. You get access to one of the Embers and it connects to the Valley of the Drakes, which connects you to New Londo Ruins and to Blighttown. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that this has to be the biggest stretch of land in the game when it comes to a level. At least that's with me kind of considering the garden and the basin as just one big level rather than two, since there's no difference and only one of them even has a bonfire. The DLC adds a lot to this area narrative-wise, as now you see this for what it truly is, a sanitized graveyard. Without said context, it almost feels kind of cozy. Depressing maybe, but still somewhat comforting. And that atmosphere comes from the fact that, despite still a fate of death, it kinda received one of the kinder fates in Dark Souls, at least compared to every other level. Everywhere else has either been abandoned to be desolate and empty, corrupted by the Abyss, or corrupted by the poison and flames of the Izalith family. But in Darkroot's case, it's more so just getting taken back by nature. Most of the farmers and knights are gone, and all that really remains are the animals, mushroom people, and these moss creatures that have an annoying amount of attack range. It has a very sad and tearful atmosphere, and that's because this land suffered such a quiet death that most don't even find it worth talking about. It's just lost to history. Hence why when we walk through it more and more, it begins to feel more and more haunted as we uncover more of the abandoned structures that have been left to be overtaken by moss and mold. The fog here adds such a moody feel, and the sound design is absolutely incredible and adds to what is some of my favorite ambient noise in gaming. It's so comforting, yet so existential at the same time. It's extremely tragic, because unlike every other area in the game, this place's death is one that is an inevitability for all walks of life. No matter what you do to run, nature outlives us all and will eventually take back what is rightfully theirs, and we simply have to accept that and walk through this valley to find what we need, the Covenant of Artorias. And the sadness is once again emphasized here through what's probably the most tragic boss fight in the entire base game, Sif the Grey Wolf. Sif is one of the best characters in all of Dark Souls, and her boss fight does not disappoint. There are two ways in which you can fight Sif in this game, and I honestly believe both to make for some really tragic and great storytelling. You can fight her before the DLC, making it seem like this is just some random dog you ran into guarding this grave, seemingly a close companion of the beloved Artorias that simply wants to keep you from grave robbing their owner's belongings, only for you to later do the DLC and discover the real truth that her true goal had always been to protect anyone from ever going back into the abyss out of hopes to keep it from corrupting anyone else, making us keep the thought in the back of our minds that we had actually not just killed a hero of the past for what could be a meaningless journey, but also killed someone who we once saved and once helped us, with neither of us knowing it, as our appearance comes from Sif's past and meeting Sif as a pup from the past is actually in our future, causing us to forever mourn and feel guilty over our actions despite not knowing. On the other hand, you can do the DLC and save Sif from the abyss before going to fight her, which gives you a special cutscene where Sif will recognize you and feel sad that she has to fight you, knowing she will likely die in the process. But she doesn't care. Not only must she honor Artorias' memory, but she wants to do everything in her power to ensure that we don't turn out like he did, that we don't become the corrupted husk that her best friend once became, as we are all that she has left, her only living friend. And this is where our story together closes. And whilst it feels all the more tragic, it also makes the chosen undead feel a lot more evil. Like, it's hard for me to go this route in the story because unless you interpret your character as more of a bad guy, I just can't help but feel so heartbroken at this outcome. I feel like there's a lot of nuance that is lost in doing it this way, but I also know that this makes the fight a lot more tragic, as both our path and Sif's paths are too far between now to justify anything other than this being the outcome. But man, does it hurt. As for the boss itself, Sif has a pretty fun and quick moveset that actually did feel challenging in my first couple runs. And she's a boss that I never feel too comfortable when fighting because she isn't a pushover by any means. Artorias would be proud, my good doggy. It does become much easier if you go from hitting her from underneath, and her health pool isn't too big, so it doesn't last that long either, even if she's really fast. Not to mention, with this being a bit more of a cinematic fight, the battle basically ends before you even kill her, as she basically becomes immobile at the last bar of health when she begins to limp around. It is a cruel, cruel addition to the fight that I hate Miyazaki for adding, but it also makes the fight that much better and all the more tragic. It's a great boss fight that feels incredibly cinematic and grand. I give Sif an 8.5 out of 10. I love that doggy, and I will mourn you forever. You're not supposed to feel good about this, I mean, you're killing a dog for Christ's sake, so having details like these really hammers home the fact that we are really not the hero that we think we are. This whole time, we have been basically just driving people to their deaths, both innocent and guilty, because we believe we are some kind of savior when we really aren't. We are but a fragment of history, no matter what ending we get, so all you can do is question whether or not anything we're doing is really worth it or not. But regardless, we are too far into our journey to turn back now. If we give up now, all we do is risk going hollow. And that's the tragedy of the chosen undead. Despite all of our friends dying because of us and our goal we've been groomed into believing, the only other choice we have is just to stop. Stop and let ourselves become hollow. Lose ourselves and become another mindless husk incapable of even the simplest thought. We cannot die, we can only become empty. And when we're this close to the end of our journey, the first moment in our undead lives where we can feel we've accomplished something, what reason do we have to turn back now that we've made it this far, and everyone else is already gone? With that, it is now time to make our way down to New Londo, and retrieve our final Lord Soul Huh? Wait, there's another boss here? Oh, yeah, the Moonlight Butterfly exists, huh? 5 out of 10. Yeah, I don't have much to say. It's a gimmick boss that I always fight over leveled since I don't use divine weapons and never really need the Ember. So it's kind of hard for me to care here, especially since I don't use ranged weapons. So anyways, on to New Londo Ruins with our new Abyss Ring. And now it's time to head into New Londo Ruins, and I love this area so much. All of you are wrong about this place, okay? All of you that hate it. It's awesome. It's fucking awesome. Is it frustrating that there are no bonfires? Yeah, sure, it is. But if you stack up on curses and don't try to rush past the ghosts, which is a stupid strategy anyways, I don't think you'll even have much trouble with it to begin with. At least, I didn't. The only place you'll really see yourself dying to a lot of enemies is the abandoned church, where you need to get to Ingward. But if you take it slow and try to lure them out individually, I don't find it to be that bad. It's certainly challenging and you'll probably run through your heals pretty quickly here, but as long as you open up the floodgates in time before dying, you'll get a pretty quick and easy shortcut to the abyss. I don't know, I just love this area a lot. I love how freakishly creepy it is and how much lore there is to learn about the world and all of its dark secrets. I also love just how rich in detail it is. This is one of the areas in the game where we have a lot more information as to its real life inspirations and what look they were going for. A lot of this game's level design is inspired by real life places or by places in other fictional stories, such as how the manga series Berserk had a major amount of influence on Miyazaki and how he portrays similar imagery in the game to it. As for New Londo, I'll just let the interview take the wheel once again. We tried a slightly different approach with the New Londo ruins, closely basing it on existing architecture, in this case, Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy, France. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but if you compare the two, the similarities are obvious. Very much like creating the cities and armored core, it's much easier for the planners, designers, and 3D artists to start with references from real life than to start from scratch. Real things contain such a mixture of influences, ideas, and such an abundance of information that I wanted to try using this technique in Dark Souls. Of course, some things worked out better than others, but I think in the end we created something that wouldn't have been possible if we started from zero. Even with the areas that didn't turn out as I'd hoped, it was a pretty successful experiment. Looking at it against the other areas, I think the difference is actually fairly obvious, but since we used this different approach for this area, it was the last area the designers worked on. This gave the production an easier amount of breathing room because with how much of it was inspired by real-life architecture, there would be much less actual work in designing to do. This is also where we get to learn about what the Dark Wraiths are and why New Londo, a once beautiful city, was cursed by this abyssal corruption and flooded to contain the darkness of the abyss as well as the Dark Wraiths. With the fact that these floodgates appear to have been built along with the underground city itself, guarded by the Drakes in the Valley of the Drakes, we can assume that this city was always meant to be flooded from its very creation, or at the very least was known to house a threat from the moment of its conception, making it all the darker of a tale knowing how many citizens lost their lives and were cursed to this realm, whilst being oblivious to the truth for so long. It really goes to show that you can't trust anyone in this game, even if they offer you the supposed truth. After all, Kath ends up giving you the Dark Wraith armor because, at the end of the day, he more than likely just wants you to turn into another one of them. There are few ways to interpret his intentions as pure, even if I do believe that an age of darkness is the best outcome for the world. New Londo also features one of the most interesting pieces of cut content in all of Dark Souls with the undead Jaril. At least, I think that's his name. I don't know if there was ever an official name for him or if it was just added with mods, but anyways, he was supposed to be this undead king looking guy, almost like a cross between a Dark Wraith and the Four Kings. And that could mean he was either a prototype for the Four Kings or perhaps a fifth king that you fight before the eventual Four Kings boss fight. I've seen some speculation that his boss fight would have been where Ingward is located and that Ingward wasn't initially supposed to be located at the top of the church, but the only real meat behind that is just because this rooftop is pretty big and kind of similar to the Gargoyles arena, so it would at least be fitting for a boss fight, but that's all there really is to it. All we know is that he was cut and you were originally gonna fight him in this area. Apparently he was gonna be pretty broken and possibly have a fucking soul level draining grab like King Allant in Demon Souls, but that was obviously not gonna make the final cut of the game, and neither did Mr. Jar Jar Eel Binks, which is unfortunate. He probably would have been a cool boss fight, and also probably would have given us a bonfire too. So with that being said, with no other real enemies outside of transient ghosts, I didn't ever find it that challenging to actually get through the first half of New Londo Ruins, as you'll be safe in more places than you won't. So I was able to dump the water out of here, get the ember, as well as some other neat loot, and made my way downwards in search of the Four Kings. You will also see in this footage that my directional awareness is pretty fucking awful, and so I continuously walked around in circles because dark areas with multiple doors will turn me into Zorro, especially when you have such symmetrical interiors. I don't even know what the fuck these blob things are, and I don't really want to know. I've been in 2 different creepy dark areas with these guys, and I want no more of them. No more, I tell you, no more. The Dark Race, on the other hand, are cool as shit, and you bet your ass I got their abilities and armor from Kath in my Dark Side run. Like, seriously, this is one of the coolest armor sets in the game. How could you not want this? Eventually, I found my way around and unveiled the Abyss to begin fighting one of my favorite Dark Souls bosses ever, the Four Kings. I fucking adore this boss. I love how fast-paced it is. I love the gimmick of essentially fighting 4 enemies in one run, constantly spawning together on a timer, making you have to work around and think on your feet and try to avoid hits as much as possible whilst also getting as many hits in as fast as possible. I love that you can play this fight with any build and still have it be incredibly fun. There's very little story to these guys in particular. We don't even know their names, but I don't care at this point. All we know is that they were 4 special men in New Londo that Gwyn held to a higher standard than the others, making them also the most affected by the corruption of the Abyss and Kath's own powers of the dark. And that's it. That's all we know about them, and you know what? I like that. I like the mystery behind them, and the sentiment that I didn't give Nito is given to them because I just like them a whole lot more. This is one of the most fun bosses in the game, as nothing else here really pressures you into actually just hitting and hitting and hitting like they do. Like, there just really isn't a Souls boss that feels like the Four Kings does. It's one of a kind. It almost feels rewarding with how patient you've had to be with every other boss, as you're now able to just focus on barraging as many hits as possible. They're kind of a puzzle boss in a way, as it makes you kind of memorize where each one is coming from so that you don't actually get backshotted, as well as the fact you need to pay attention to timing while still attacking, so it's a bit puzzling at first, but you'll get the hang of it. And also, I don't mean to brag, but I beat these guys first try in my first playthrough. In fact, I have never died to the Four Kings before. That's right, round of applause. I know you guys don't care. I know this is all I will amount to in life, but god damn it, let me be proud of myself here. Yeah, remember when I said there was a third boss that I never died to next to Moonlight, Butterfly, and Pinwheel? Yeah, that was the Four Kings. It was the 4 fucking kings of all bosses. How funny is that? With that being said, I'm giving the Four Kings an easy 9 out of 10. And now, before we pay the Lord of Sunlight a visit, it is time for me to cover the beloved Artorias of the Abyss DLC. Now, I'm gonna apologize in advance here because I'm not gonna be reviewing the DLC in the same linear structure as I have for the rest of the game, as with it being so short and linear itself, I just kinda want to discuss it as an overall entity from the get-go. The Dark Souls Artorias of the Abyss DLC is fantastic, with easily 2 of my favorite bosses in the entire game through Artorias and Manus. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think that Artorias is probably my favorite boss in Dark Souls from both a narrative and technical perspective. On a pure technical note, Artorias stands the test of time in a way that few Dark Souls bosses really do. It's a fast-paced test of both patience and timing that requires you to engage in what's practically one big messy dance with one of the most tragic figures in the world of this game. A knight bound by his honor and desire to save the people of Ulasil, only to lose not only the fight but himself in the process, using what little strength he had left to protect his companion Sif before the Abyss inevitably took him over and began wreaking havoc on Ulasil, becoming nothing more than a husk fragmented by Manus, with the chosen undead being the only person left capable of stopping him. I once watched a Dark Souls lore video when I was bored that asked the question of why, as a negative to the DLC. Specifically, since we can always just leave, why do we even bother fighting here? Why do we even bother helping? What reason do we have if this doesn't impact our true journey to link the fire or bring about the Age of Dark? And my own personal answer to this resides in the fact that this is a role-playing game. We make the reason for ourselves to some degree. Are we noble like Artorias and in search of a way to save this town from the Abyss? Do we know that we are the true hero that has to contain this being before it wrecks the entire world, thus making our entire journey up to this point screwed before it even began? began? Or do we maybe search for the power that the Abyss holds? Wanting to defeat Manus would certainly be a motivation in both achieving the Age of Dark and linking the fire. As if we believe we're a hero like Frampt and Elizabeth try to talk us into being, then we have all the more reason to help. And if you really don't want to, well, then you could always not play it. You could always avoid the DLC entirely after all. It's completely optional, even in the fucking remaster and Prepare to Die edition, you don't have to do it. You really have to go out of your way to access it to begin with, so you can go through your whole playthrough without even bothering to do this at all. And if you do go out of your way to head over there, not just for the experience but for the story, then that means you've already found said motivation to go there to begin with, because you want more, because you're curious, because you want answers. I don't want to cover up every question with the narrative by saying you have to make up everything for yourself, but I do believe this especially is one of those moments where you really should just suspend your disbelief and follow the immersion. The only real complaint I have with Artorias of the Abyss is just how small it is. From Software DLCs, aside from Elden Ring, are known for being pretty short but sweet, and I can appreciate that about the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, but the problem with that here is that its shortness makes it lack in unique qualities in my opinion. Ulasil Township is a great area, but you can get through it within a couple of minutes if you play your cards right. This is because the DLC is extremely linear, lacking in the Metroidvania structure of progression that the rest of the game carries. Whilst I understand why it's easier to keep it like this in a 2-hour DLC, the only real side thing you can do in all of Ulasil is the optional boss fight with Calamite. But all it takes to get there is just the regular progression and a little bit of backtracking and NPC interaction, and then you go to the arena, which sits right next to Artorias's with no level to progress through to get to it. You just walk for a couple of minutes, avoid a few dogs, then climb down a ladder, and you're there. And that's really all you do outside of the standard linear progression you do for the rest of the DLC. All of this makes her feeling a bit underhanded in terms of content, since the first area you go through is already just a retooling of an already existing area in the base game, and whilst it works for environmental storytelling, it makes for the start of the DLC feeling a little less special in my opinion. Like, I love Ulasil and the Abyss, but I can't help but wish there was a bit more divergence here. Maybe more of a level with Calamite and more reward for it as well, whether it be more lore or a special item that could come in handy for one of the few NPC interactions in the game. But with that being said, I still quite love the DLC. Each boss, even the opening Sanctuary Guardian, was fun and fresh, adding for a newer, faster pace to the usual slow-timed, thought-inducing fights of the base game. Boss fights that have paved the way for a lot of the battles we face in the later games. Like, really, if you think about it, the faster-paced combat that you associate with the Souls games now, it doesn't entirely start in Dark Souls itself, but in its DLC, as this entire thing offers for a much needed change of pace that sets the standard for Souls combat going forward. Despite my complaints, I do love this DLC. Despite it feeling like one long hallway, it still features the best fights and some of the best storytelling in all of Dark Souls. To rate the bosses, I would give the Sanctuary Guardian a 7 out of 10, Artorias an easy 10 out of 10, Calamite an 8.5, and Manus a 9.5. It is arguably more satisfying to overcome and conquer this than the base game itself because of just how much you have to challenge what you've already come to understand about this game, and I can't love it enough for that. So with the DLC covered, that means we just have one last spot left to go. It is time to end our journey where the story of everything began, to finish Dark Souls, to a place that existed long before us and will live long after us. That's right, it's time to go to the Kiln of the First Flame. As we offer the souls to the Lord Vessel, we open the door to the kiln and cross through the stairs walled with a cloud of light around it, as the vestiges of warriors long lost from the past traverse from left to right, and as we pass them by, we enter the kiln. The Kiln of the First Flame is a bittersweet area. It is a quiet, somber, and desolate spot with nothing but dusty memories of an age long lost. The only enemies are 5 black knights of each weapon category, but that is all. You can clear them each one by one with no issue, or even run past them with no issue. The only purpose they serve is to stand guard and protect Gwyn and the First Flame from anyone who come to threaten it. But by this point, we are far above them. We pass by tall, burning buildings in coats of ash, remnants of the fire that had killed this poor world. The only way I can describe this level is pathetic. It's a pathetic effort of protection from Gwyn, and once we finally enter his arena, we see what a pathetic mess he has become. A hollow now, only retaining some of his combat abilities. He doesn't even use any sunlight magic against us, even that has been lost. He has lost his identity, lost his home, his family, his glory, and soon he will lose this flame as well. The last thing he could hang on to from his age of power, clinging so desperately to it that he loses himself in the process. I tend to enjoy doing this fight more with Solaire as a summon, as it closes his questline as he links the fire in his own world if he survives, but it is somber and very cinematic as a fight to do solo as well. I'm not the best at parrying, so I don't tend to cheese Gwyn. I fight him fairly, and he certainly is challenging, but as long as you are patient as you've been through the whole game up to now, you won't have too much to worry about. Just use the methods and skills you've garnered up to this point, and you'll be okay. This is the perfect place to test them after all. This is the end for the chosen undead and the end for Gwyn. It is intentionally anticlimactic. Even though he is quite challenging without parries, he is by no means the toughest boss in the game. He is not what he once was, and that's the whole point. You're supposed to think, is this really all that's left? Is that it? That bittersweet feeling perfectly represents this whole journey and this final boss fight, and it really makes you think about the theme of power in Dark Souls, and how those in power will bring ruin to those below them, until they have no one left to bring ruin to. And the only one left they can ruin is themselves. Seath's power drove him to madness as he continuously experimented on and ruined the lives of what could be millions over thousands of years with the crystallization and his sorceries and curses. The Witch of Izalith cursed her very own family to hellish torment and deformities, all because of her desire to recreate the first flame. And the four kings of Gwyn were the biggest victims of the abyssal corruption, despite being the most wise and respected members of New Londo. Kath and Frampt both want the power to control you, but in different ways, and the man that once controlled it all, Gwyn himself, has become this pathetic husk of a god, throwing himself into the fire, creating the dark side and cursing humanity, allowing Gwendolyn to further keep up the facade that all is still okay in this world when it isn't. He does all of this out of fear of losing that power. He wants to keep it, even if it's not even real anymore. And we are the ones to put him out of all that misery and either continue keeping that power burning past his death or let it die with a whimper as we enter a new human-led age. If we link that fire, we continue letting that power of his live on, letting it take us in the process. A victim of Gwyn burns away to ash, further enforcing his reign of false glory and false godhood despite being dead now. But if we let it die, we essentially take power over the Dark Souls world. But what do we do with this power? How do we rule? Are we better or worse than Gwyn? Will the curse truly be broken? And if it is, how long will that be enough for us? Won't we just want more power too? I love these questions. This is the primary reason why I usually choose the dark ending, and it's also a big reason why I love Gwyn's boss fight. Is it the best one in the game? No, but it is satisfying and thematically sound. I would give Gwyn an 8.5 out of 10, being one of the best bosses in the game and one of the most narratively rich as well. There's few things I can complain about here. It is the perfect way to end a near perfect game, and I can't help but say now just how much I adore Dark Souls as a video game. I've been sitting here for a while now, writing down my thoughts and unintentionally creating my longest and biggest video on this channel. Rambling and reciting a lot just so I can express my journey with this brilliant game. So I do hope you all enjoyed this. I absolutely love Dark Souls, and it has made a big mark on my life in such a short time since playing it for the first time. It's hard to explain, but this along with Bloodborne truly feel like the games that were made just for me. Hot take, I know. But seriously, the hype is real, and whilst it has its ups and downs, the ups are simply too high for the lows to truly ruin anything about this game for me. I may not love every area and every boss, but there just isn't anything quite like Dark Souls 1. Many games have tried to replicate it, but the magic can't simply be recaptured. And I think that is the main thing I have to say here to carry my thoughts. And that's why I am deciding to end this video off here. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. share it with your friends, as this is one of the biggest projects I've done, and I would really like it if you all, paid attention to it. I do plan on making videos on the rest of the Souls games, so if you are excited for that, make sure to turn the bell notification on so that you're notified on all my future uploads. With that being said, I'm gonna head out now. I will see you all later. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.